All right.
No, you
All right. So I'm gonna start the music in 3 seconds, and then I'll let you know when we're back. All right. So I'm gonna do three, two, one, and just start it. So three, two.
no, you don't need the.
I'm doing this my way.
He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend.
Talking on it though, then
He
you
a
can't bring it up
legend.
later.
Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with the League of Items, and this is the NFL Week 2 slate breakdown with Billy. Billy, how's it going?
It's going well, man. Like you said, week two. Week two was one of my best weeks last year, which is due to randomness and variance. But we're gonna pretend like there is something about week two that brings a little magic. So hopefully we can use that to our advantage.
The only thing I heard in that last sentence was magic and week 2, and you won money. So I don't even know what the rest of those words meant. So we're just gonna get right into it. So in this video, we're gonna go over every individual game that's on the Draftkings main slate, and we will also attempt to create the almost perfect lineup. Uh, Reminder: last week we had Derek Carr, so you know this is going to be great. Uh, Touchdown variance got us last time, but 2 weeks in a row, impossible. All right, so first game we have Detroit at Green Bay. So, do you have a side that you prefer to talk about first, or do you want me to give the? Actually, I'll just give the overview. So right now, Detroit is away at Green Bay plus 225. The over under is 49.5, and the spread is 6.5. Last week we saw Detroit lose to Chicago, and Green Bay beat up on Minnesota until they gave up a bunch of late points to Kirk Cousins and Adam Thielen and ruined my fantasy week. But other than that, it was great. Um, so what team would you prefer to talk about?
I think the side with more fantasy goodness here would be the Packers, in my opinion. The offense looked really good against the Vikings last week, who do not have the same defense that they had in the past couple of years, it would seem. But this Detroit defense really struggled last year, particularly against slot receivers, and they continued that in week one. Anthony Miller had a really good week. I am drawing a blank on the name of the slot corner for Detroit who he abused as he was doing that. But the Packers sort of spread out who they use in the slot, and Devontae Adams has for the past couple of years run a lot of they move him all around and try to manufacture open space for him. He ran a bunch of routes out of the slot in week one, had both of his touchdowns from there and a whole bunch of yards. So I think that Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers might be a little more popular than they would otherwise be because they went off in week one. But I think it's some good chalk that you can go back to the well there, and would also wouldn't mind MVS, but in particular like Alan Lazard, just given that Valdez-Scantling had a better week in week one.
Yeah.
Lazard still had the targets, had more routes, was the primary slot receiver for them. So I think the whole Green Bay passing game. I think Aaron Jones. I expect Green Bay to score some points, so I think you can go there. But I think there's some other backs that we'll get to that I like better.
So for Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers is bad at football. Everybody knows that. He's terrible. He's probably one of the worst quarterbacks of all time. At least that's what we were being told going into week one. He's the third most expensive quarterback on the slate. Like you said, Devontae Adams had a huge week, so there will be a lot of people chasing points. I like MVS better at the price. Kenny Galladay is out. That was announced like 20 minutes ago. I just saw that on the blurbs. So yeah, I think that at 49.5, you'll get some attention. There are some bigger totals out there this week, but the Rodgers Devontae Adams stack is a little expensive. Devontae is the number one priced receiver on the slate, so I think that might keep some people off. Maybe it does make sense to actually just run it back and hope that not everybody's jumping on it. They outthink themselves. But for Detroit, I think that the main takeaways from the first week should be that DeAndre Swift can't catch. That there are a lot of receivers involved when Kenny Galladay is not there, so it's going to be spread out. Danny Amendola received a lot of targets. Quintez Cephas had a lot of targets, and so did Marvin Jones. Marvin Jones went off against the Packers 1 or 2 years ago. Like, I think he scored like 3 touchdowns and had 200 yards or something insane. Do you remember that game? It's not really relevant. It's not really relevant, but I just remember that happening. Matt Stafford at 6,200 is probably a pretty fair price. I think once you see him hovering that 6,000 mark, it's when you want to play Matt Stafford in general. So if you want a different way to get Devontae Adams into your lineup, play Matt Stafford, get yourself 1 or 2 pass catchers from Detroit. So Marvin Jones, Danny Amendola, Quintez Cephas, and TJ Hawkinson should all be considered. The backfield is kind of a mess in terms of we don't know who's going to get a lot of touches in this game. I think that they're not going to like completely punish DeAndre Swift for missing that ball. AP is still going to get touches. Who knows how they'll use Kerryon Johnson. But Hawkinson is also a little bit expensive, 5,200. Seems to be. I think that's going to be a pretty good play though. Do you remember how Vikings tight ends did against Green Bay last week? Irv Smith didn't have a good week, right?
Yeah, Irv Smith. That was more usage oriented. Smith had 2 fantasy points. Rudolph had
2 targets, 4.8 points. Irv Smith had 1 target, 2.1 points. That might have little to do with what Green Bay was doing and just more with the Vikings. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Yeah. I think it's sort of inconclusive. I think would be my sort of word for it. I think you're right about Hawkinson. I think that without Galladay back, he should continue to see decent volume, but the price is high. Hunter Henry is 5,100 playing KC. Jonnu Smith at 4,200 with AJ Brown out. Noah Fant at 44 against the Steelers. A lot of guys that are probably equal or possibly better options at a lower price. But if you have multiple lineups, I don't mind throwing some TJ Hawkinson in there. I probably like the Lions receivers coming back with Rodgers rather than with Stafford. I just feel like Rodgers' ceiling is probably higher here. And I think for me, at least, the Lions backfield is a stay away. I think it might be more interesting later in the year. There's stats somewhere on this, but I think sort of just logically, the older players tend to do better at the beginning of the season, and younger players sort of step up at the end of the season. I think part of that is just your body breaking down a little bit and recovery, as well as for rookies and first year guys, learning more as they go along. So I think you're right that AP is probably the play if you want to get into the Lions backfield this week. Especially considering he got some targets last week, but I don't want to touch it. Maybe later in the season, DeAndre Swift gets him a little more interesting for DFS.
If I'm playing this game, if I'm playing players from this game, I probably would end up on DeAndre Swift in a decent number of cases because we saw about 6 targets combined for the Vikings running backs, and they showed that in a high high pressure situation they went to DeAndre Swift. So I don't think they're going to completely shy away from him. I wouldn't overexpose myself to him, but I would definitely try to get him in some of those game stacks. And I do like Marvin Jones a decent amount,
Yeah.
but his price is a little prohibitive, so you might actually get him at a pretty low ownership. If there's one player from this game or one stack that you want to use, would you want to throw it in the almost perfect lineup as a placeholder?
Yeah, I think it's worth putting Rogers and Adams there. I think you're right that they might be a little too expensive. Rogers more so than Adams. I think Adams might be the best high price wide receiver play on the slate. Agree with you on Swift, and I guess just to be clear, I don't say later in the season because I think that his volume will be reduced because of what happened at the end of the game. I just think that even if it's the same or slightly higher than it was last week, and if the Packers win this game, as you said, 49 total. I just don't know if there's enough there to
Yeah.
beat out the other options at running back.
Yeah, it does. It is, I guess, very thin, unless it kind of just is.
Yeah, no, I think he's in play. But yeah, I think that's right.
So, do you want Marvin Jones or Cephas or Hawkinson as a run back just as a placeholder? Because I think it'll be helpful if we start plugging stuff into the almost perfect lineup and then having to replace it, like going through that thought process of which play is actually better.
Yeah, I like that. I would say out of those three, I like Jones. Cephas is probably the price play, but I don't know if he sees the same volume that he did last week. I think I'd rather play even Amendola above him. But I think Jones has the best chance to sort of go off here. Hawkinson, tough to see him putting up a huge 3-4x day at that price. Or maybe not. I shouldn't say that. I think he needs to get in the end zone probably twice to get there.
Yeah. So the last thing I would say about this game is that the Detroit defense might be really banged up. Their three starting cornerbacks, I think, were hurt in the last game. Jamie Collins was ejected, so I think a lot of that falling apart was kind of not what we should expect moving forward unless those corners are out. And then also Green Bay was beat deep by Adam Thielen a few times. I think that means that Marvin Jones could just be in a really good spot again. So I do like the idea of taking flyers on some of these Detroit players and hoping that the game shoots out, and maybe that allows you to get the Rodgers double stacks. So that's a good start from game one. Let's go to game two, San Francisco against the New York Jets. So San Francisco is currently a 315 favorite, 76% implied win rate, 41.5 over under, and the spread is 7. The Jets are plus 270 at home, so we got a home dog. I don't think a lot of people are going to be on the Jets at all this season. Even on the betting market, I could see some people saying I'll take a home dog with 7 points at home and just hope the game is really ugly and stays close. But for Draftkings purposes, I'm not convinced. So I'll talk about the Jets, and you can take the 49ers afterwards. So from the Jets side, if I'm looking for a player from the Jets, Jamison Crowder's out. Denzel Mims on the IR. Brashad Perriman's still in there with his swollen knee. I don't know if that's going to help anybody. Le'Veon's on the IR. So we have Frank Gore, Josh Adams. I'm not sure about Pirine. So I think that you probably could get some kind of weird value play on Chris Herndon. Maybe there's some information that comes about Frank Gore and Josh Adams and how they end up using them. But that's kind of disgusting and scary. I think if anything, I'm going after a pass catcher from this. So I would probably end up on Chris Herndon in some lineups just from a price play and a volume play. But that's really it. It's a pretty disgusting situation.
Yeah. Especially against this San Francisco defense, which didn't necessarily live up to its reputation in week one, but brings back a lot of the same guys and is not the defense you want to see when seemingly your entire offense, all of your offensive skill position players are hurt. Your offensive line isn't very good, and you have your should be franchise quarterback sitting there for the taking. At least it's at home, I guess. But I think this is a stay away. we mentioned last week that Sam Darnold has a proclivity for finding his slot receiver. That was Jamison Crowder in week 1. He went off. Chris Hogan, I guess Rashad Perriman also ran 10 slot routes. Chris Hogan was the next guy on the list, and the only other wide receiver to run from the slot. So that might be a guy if you are desperate to get a jet in your lineup that is worth taking a flyer on. I haven't refreshed the projections I use since last night. Seeing how many targets they have Hogan at.
Yeah, so based off of what DraftKings has right now, Brashad Perriman, Chris Hogan, Braxton Berrios, Josh Malone are going to be the 4 wide receivers. I guess they could probably run out 2 tight ends more often and use Chris Herndon, or just use Chris Herndon as like a receiver and like lining him up outside. You could do something like that. They have Ryan Griffin as well. So I think Daniel Brown got a decent amount of snaps last year too for some team. I don't know if he was a Jet last year.
He was, and I think I just pulled up last year. I think that they'd probably be more likely to. Ryan Griffin ran 62 routes from the slot last year at a 285.
And that's when a lot of that was when Herndon was Herndon out the entire year?
He played like 1 game last year, and the year before actually Herndon ran almost half of his routes from the slot. So I think you're right that either of those guys could slide out there. And then Berrios, I think, is a guy that played a little in the slot for Carolina. So I think it's who knows. But I think you're right on Herndon. He is my highest on tight end in the first crunch that I ran a few minutes before that. It feels like one of those plays where you're going to just be praying for garbage time points by like the middle of the second quarter. I think it's easier to stomach that when it's someone in the passing game than if it's a running back and after 2 minutes you're like, okay, he's not getting carries. But I think San Francisco D might be the play. Even though they're 4K, if you can find the space, should push down ownership. On the San Francisco side, I think you can go back to Mostert here. Again, the big game in week 1 might drive up ownership, but it drove up price a little bit too, so that might even things out. He's at 6,400 this week, projected for low ownership. I don't think I'll have a ton of them, but I think it's a decent play. Kittle's banged up. The wide receivers are banged up. I think he's going to get the most work for the foreseeable future. I don't really trust McKinnon or Coleman to get enough work to be in my lineup, but they'll do enough to make me be cautious with Mostert.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, I'm not playing. So I guess there's a few things. I'm not playing Jimmy G. In regards to Mostert, what do you think about the long catch that he had in week 1? Because like if you're somebody who's just looking at the final number and you don't take into consideration how he got there, like I guess it doesn't make total sense to completely get rid of the long touchdown that he had, but without that he would have had 10 points or something like that. So I think between that, the fact that Tevin Coleman should be able to play more in this game as well. Jerick McKinnon did get a lot of touches and work. So if you're the 49ers, do you really even want to destroy one of your running backs with like 20 carries in this game? I figured it'd probably be like they spread it out a little bit more.
Yeah. I think that is absolutely a valid concern. I am pulling up the red zone numbers for them, because I think to your point, I don't think, if I remember correctly, that Mostert, am I saying it right? Is it Mostert or Mostert?
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those.
I don't know. Yeah, one of those. But
Raheem.
Everyone knows. Yeah, Raheem. Everyone knows what we're talking about. So what? That's snaps. Which target? From the time that he took over last year, he steadily saw, from week 11 on, about 2 or 3 targets in each game. That was the most of any. Typically, he led the Niners running backs in targets. Red zone work, he That's not what I wanted. But I think that it's the same story there that, if I remember correctly, that he led the team in red zone touches too, once he took over the job. So yeah, I think I come back to the same place that if I'm playing a San Francisco running back, it's him.
Oh, yeah,
But
definitely.
that the fact that those other guys are there, even if they vulture one touchdown, that kills the play in a lot of games. So I think you need to think about that when you're thinking about your exposure to Mostert.
Yeah, so this is the kind of spot where when you're building 150 lineups, you're thinking about the max exposure because of the other people that are in the backfield, the insane positive game script that they have, and you're really attaching your I guess the reason to play him is because you expect them to win by a couple touchdowns, but unless he gets one of those first touchdowns, you could just have like a horrible day from Mostert
Exactly.
because they could probably just kill
And
the clock.
especially with he's one of those plays where it's within the realm of possibility that he has a game where you need him in your lineup to win, which is why I think he's viable, even though the downside is 2-3 points or something.
Yeah. Because, I mean, so I guess if just thinking about this from a betting perspective, if I played this game, it would definitely be 49ers -7. If you can get a better number, great. And I would also be fine at playing the under as a way to get exposure to the 49ers winning, because unless the Jets are able to score 17 points and the 49ers offense is just horrible for some reason, or 24 to be probably 17 to get the over in a competitive game. Yeah, I think it's definitely San Francisco there.
You could easily see the Niners winning this game,
28-0.
38-3, and it still goes under 41.5 or something.
Yeah.
I have the ESPN lines up, so I don't know what the current is.
Yeah, that's enough for this game. It was just a long way of saying this game is kind of stinky, but I guess that is kind of where you can find these good plays. Like if Mostert does go off, that's really the only spot that I could see. I'm probably not touching any of these receivers.
I guess just the last thought there is, as we mentioned last week, the Jets' run defense has it's something that they focus on. So probably another word of caution on Mostert. I'll probably play some Jimmy G just because I think there's the potential for you'll have some cheap wide receivers to pair with him, especially if you think Kittle will be more of a distraction than a real threat.
Kittle has been ruled out for Sunday's game against the Jets.
Okay, but yeah, I didn't see that news. I knew he was last time I saw he was questionable. So yeah, look, Jordan Reed might be a guy you want to get in there. Get him before he gets hurt. Knock on wood. For his long-term health.
Kind of terrifying.
So there's guys like that. I think Ayuk was questionable last I saw. Wouldn't be surprised if they held him out. They signed Mohamed Sanu. I don't even know if he's in the player pool this week.
Not.
So yeah, your options are limited there. But presumably the Niners want to run the ball, so all cautionary things. But yeah, it's long tails. It's high upside, low downside. So if you want to get a little bit in a big GPP or something, I think that's worthwhile.
Yep. Okay.
And on the other side, Herndon. Yeah, I think Herndon's in play. He might even be worth plugging into the perfect lineup for now. 3,400. Somebody's got to get targets when the Jets are getting killed and trying to throw to catch up.
Yeah, so we'll throw them in there. Next up, we have the Giants against the Bears. So the Giants are plus 200. Bears minus 235. Over-under's 42. The spread's 5.5. Right now, the Giants are one of the favorite bets that everyone is talking about, which scares me as a Giants fan. I don't ever like to be in that position where everybody's talking up my team because it makes it feel really like a really bad play. So I'll take the Giants because I'm a Giants fan. Deal with it. So based off what we saw in the Steelers game, I'm fine with Daniel Jones. I think that the interception was a backbreaker, but for DFS, it's only going to cost you a couple points. The play action game with Darius Slayton is really good. Saquon is the second most expensive running back on the slate at 8,400. We have Sterling Shepard, 5,500, is actually more expensive than Darius Slayton. I do think that Darius Slayton is actually just the number one wide receiver. The Giants drafted Slayton to act as the outside wide receiver, has the big play upside. Ratley and Board both did get a decent amount of snaps last week because Golden Tate wasn't playing. Golden Tate is still currently questionable. Evan Ingram continues to drop passes, which is disgusting. The Giants ran Caden Smith on the field a little bit and Toilolo, like they both had some work in 2 tight end sets. Like I don't think they're a play at all, but they were out there. I'm not playing Evan. Actually, like I guess now is the time to play Evan Ingram at 5,300. I don't think that his price is going to move much higher than that if he has a good game. Like I couldn't see them pricing Evan Ingram up into the 6,000s, right? Has he ever reached that level? Probably not.
Maybe like there was that, like he had, those like a string of good games at the end of the season, maybe 2 years at the end of 2018, I think.
Yeah, his rookie year.
Oh yeah, but like I think your point is taken.
Yeah, so I mean Saquon, I think this is a great time to play Saquon. They just played against one of the best rush defenses in the league. He still had 12.6 points because of a long reception. He was getting massacred in the backfield, and then Tiki Barber comes out and starts talking garbage. So I love the Saquon play here. Just as a contrarian play, when everybody's saying, oh, they're horrible, just play them. I could get Sterling Shepard into my lineup. I could get Darius Slayton into my lineup. I think Daniel Jones at 5,800 is good. He has I don't know if I'd say really high upside, but he does have the rushing upside to pick up like an extra 3 to 4 points with potentially a touchdown. So I could definitely see myself stacking the Giants. It is kind of scary. But again, I don't think the Bears should have won in week 1. So what do you have to say about the Bears?
Yeah, this should be a fun pillow fight between two of the NFL's historic franchises.
Oh my god. Just make it fast. You're hurting my feelings.
So on the Bears side, I think that we talked about the Lions earlier and some of their struggles with the defending the passing game the last couple years, in particular in the slot. So Mitch Trubisky sort of had one really bad quarter on Sunday and then 3 good quarters. I think he could potentially have another decent game here against the Giants. The Giants secondary, they've added pieces, but last year were the second worst team in the league by PPR points allowed to opposing wide receivers above average. So it's sort of like a war-like metric. Mike Beers posted every week on Twitter. I think it's a really interesting one. The Giants gave up the 3rd most wide receiver one or 2 games, so top 24 last season, and ranked 24th in points allowed to boundary wide receivers. So I think an interesting play here on the Chicago side after the big game for Anthony Miller might be to come back with Trubisky and Allen Robinson. See if he can do some work. I mentioned him last week, just a really talented guy. And if somebody can actually get the ball close to him, he usually does well. In the backfield, it's another one of those morasses. He didn't end up in any of my initial lineups, but I kind of do like David Montgomery as a contrarian play here. I think he's a guy that was maybe undervalued coming into the season. I think this is a game that the Bears have a chance to win, which is when you want to play him. He had really big splits between wins and losses last year. Unsurprising for a back of that type. You're not going to get a lot of passing game work, so you probably need him to win and be ahead late to pay off. But I think at 5,600, a decent RB2 play.
Based off of what I saw the Giants doing in the first game, I think Bradbury actually had a really good game. They switched out. Him and Blake Martinez are 2 really good additions to the defense. I'm not sure how it's going to end up working like as an overall defense, but I think that when people are on DraftKings trying to put together lineups, they're going to see Trubisky and Green, see the Giants play them. So I think a lot of that ownership is going to be pretty weak. In terms of like how good the lineups are going to be. I don't like Montgomery that much against the Giants. Blake Martinez, I think, does a lot for their defense in regards to the rushing game. I think that Tariq Cohen's probably a better play than Montgomery. If you're looking for a contrarian way to kind of approach this game. I would say it stays like if I'm building a lineup with these players, it's because I think that the Giants are able to score some points and get some work for Tariq Cohen. So when it's Bradbury against Allen Robinson's definitely the more talented player overall. I think he's probably one of the most talented receivers in the NFL. Just has horrible quarterbacks all the time. The Giants historically have been beaten up by secondary receivers, so I think Anthony Miller, just going back to him, is fine. Jimmy Graham got a decent amount of work, ended up having a touchdown. He was talked up a lot in the preseason. In regards to the defenses, I could see the Giants' defense being an okay play against Mitch Trubisky. He is a bad quarterback. So 2,400 for the Giants, I think that's fine. It's not my favorite play or anything like that, but I could definitely see myself clicking it. So I think my favorite play from this game is Saquon because I'm a Giants homer. I think I like Tariq Cohen more than David Montgomery, and then I like Slayton as the best wide receiver, and I think I like A-Rob more than Anthony Miller. Do you want to put any of those into the almost perfect lineup? Do you think any of them are deserving?
Allen Robinson is 64. I think Allen Robinson is worth thinking about. These stats can lie because you never know sort of what coverage people were in. But Bradbury gave up both of the touchdowns last week. Overall 4 receptions on 7 targets, 70 yards, split among a couple different receivers. So I agree. I think we talked about Bradbury last week. He is a guy that historically has especially done well against bigger receivers. So Robinson would certainly fit into that category, but it's not Stephon Gilmore where I'm like scared to play somebody against him.
Sure.
So I'm willing to go to Robinson despite that matchup.
All right.
On the Giants side, I agree. I think Saquon is worth thinking about. Always a potential for a huge game. Don't mind the other guys, but not sort of perfect lineup material in my opinion.
Yep. All right. Next game, Los Angeles Rams against the Philadelphia Eagles. So obviously you're going to talk about the Eagles. I will talk about the Rams. Right now it is the Rams are minus 103, Philadelphia's minus 112, over-under is 45.5, which seems low. Spread's only 1 point. That's kind of weird. I guess I not really. I guess people saw Los Angeles on the Sunday night game, and then also the Eagles lost to the Redskins, so people might just be overreacting. Don't have a good feel for that line at all, actually. Philadelphia should be getting some players back. Lane Johnson's playing, right? And Miles Sanders is also playing. But for the Rams, Jared Goff, I think that I will be taking shots with Jared Goff throughout the season. I like the concentrated targets that we have with Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. I'm not going to play Higbee most of the time unless you tell me that it's like an extremely good matchup for some reason. Gerald Everett's questionable. Malcolm Brown, disgusting week 1. 18 attempts, 2 touchdowns. So I think there will be some people chasing that. Did you see anything from that game that suggested Cam Akers was used that way because it was such a close game? Like if it was more of a shootout, does he get more passing work? Is that the kind of player that he is? I'm not really that familiar with Cam Akers at all.
Yeah, I don't know. And I think arguably anybody that unless it's like a sort of Rams beat guy with inside knowledge and of sort of like conversations behind the scene, I don't think anyone can really draw much like based on his college usage. Just because teams do different things differently. A guy might have a skill set that wasn't exploited.
Yeah, in college,
and all that stuff. So I mean, I think that's the best you can do is sort of your framing there is that Brown is the presumptive guy. The projections I'm looking at here have him at 12 carries and Akers at 10. So I think the play, as you suggest, probably fade Brown, and if you want to play a back, play Akers, because of ownership and public perception.
I will most likely not do that. But in regards to the Eagles, so I guess the two important things would be what do you think about the Eagles offense, and then how would you attack the Eagles defense, either based off of what Washington did or just as an Eagles fan, like you probably know their weaknesses pretty well. And there are a
Yeah,
lot of them, so that's fine.
there are, unfortunately, and some of the ones that have persisted for years now don't seem to have been fully resolved or even partially resolved over the offseason. So on the Rams side, just the one other thing I'll add there is I agree on Higbee. I think the other thing that would make me want to play one of the Rams tight ends is if Everett or Higbee is out. I don't mind going to the other one, just because that those tight end targets get concentrated. So if Everett does get ruled out, I think Higbee's okay at 4,700, maybe a little too expensive.
Yeah, that's kind of
On
what I
the
was thinking.
Eagles, yeah, on the Eagles side, offensively, I think my personal opinion is that Lane Johnson is the most important player on this team, even more than Carson Wentz in terms of the Eagles' success. He's just so good and just changes what they do from a schematic standpoint in a lot of ways. That being said, Aaron Donald is a nightmare for anyone. The Eagles are down a lot of guys in the interior of their line still, with Peters bumping out to tackle and Johnson playing tackle himself. So I worry about what Donald is going to do from a disruption standpoint. So great to have Miles Sanders back. I don't know if this is the best spot to play him.
Yeah.
Although you may get some passing game work out of him that you don't necessarily get out of Boston Scott if he's the guy in that role.
Mm-hmm.
So I like going back to the tight ends here, just because the Eagles always have them involved. Presumably Jalen Ramsey will be on one of Rager or Jackson on most snaps. So not. I think just sort of generally literally outside of Stephon Gilmore, there are no DBs that I'm like, oh, he's facing him. The wide receiver's facing this guy, so I'm not going to play him.
Yeah.
But certainly a factor for those guys, especially when it's not an elite receiver. So yeah, I think if I'm playing somebody, it's probably the tight ends. Wentz, I worry about pressure, but I think he's okay. I'll have a few shares of him. Sanders, may not a ton, but maybe one or two. I don't think it's the worst play, but certainly not the best. Defensively, I think the weakness here is still the secondary. They did a pretty good job last week, but it was against Dwayne Haskins and
McLaurin
company,
and Sims.
and and not this Rams group. So I think the guy here is probably Cooper Kupp. The Eagles, as we talked about a little bit last week, lost Malcolm Jenkins, have moved Jalen Mills, a former cornerback, to safety, which probably fits his skill set better, and it gives them that coverage element at safety. But they're thin at cornerback, and with Kupp running most of his routes from the slot still, that should give him a decent matchup here. I think you can go to the run game, but as we talked about earlier, it's probably a split thing, so I don't know if either guy's going to get enough work. You're just sort of coin flipping on who, if anyone, gets some touchdowns.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're at the point where like the salary is becoming prohibitive. So I think that we both kind of agree Saquon's probably not the best play this week, and like hopefully there's something better somewhere down the line. So I'm gonna take Saquon out of the almost perfect lineup. I think that Miles Sanders, I'm gonna put him as a placeholder in this lineup because I think just from an ownership play and like the uncertainty around what the role is going to look like coming off the injury, that's a really interesting play to me. The funny thing is like if Miles Sanders was listed at like 5,000, everybody would play Miles Sanders. But the fact that Miles Sanders is 6,000, I think some people end up staying away. Do you have any numbers on like the ownership projections for Miles Sanders? Do you think it's going to be over-owned?
I don't think so. So what I'm looking at now has him between 5% and 6%. The chalk at running back this week, and I think this is probably right, is Jonathan Taylor, who, if I'm not mistaken, is cheaper, if not the same price. I think he's like high fours.
I have it at 5,700.
57, yeah, so even closer. So I mean that might give you leverage, since so many people will be on
Taylor.
Taylor. Currently I have him at 28. The projections. Zeke is the second highest projected ownership at running back. Then Kenyon Drake against the Redskins. And these numbers still have Benny Snell as number 4, but I think that'll probably come down now that it sounds like James Conner will most likely suit up.
Okay.
So yeah, I think Sanders is a decent pivot play. I think if you're sort of putting together like a cash game lineup, then maybe more risk than you want to take on there.
So if Gerald Everett is out, what do you think's a better play? Tyler Higbee, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, or Chris Herndon? Which one do you think is the best? For tournament winning upside, I guess.
I think it's either Ertz or Herndon for me.
Yeah, I think I like Herndon because there is so much value there. Your worst case scenario is probably like 6 points.
Yeah, and he's 3,400. Ertz at 56 is cheaper than he usually is, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's right around it. I think it might be even a little higher, but the pricing is different this year for tight ends than last year.
Yeah. So, look, Ertz has on his resume a lot of 10 reception, 2 touchdown type games, or 10 receptions, 1 touchdown, which he can get you. I think if I was going to bet on one of these guys to get you 25 or 30 points, it has to be Ertz as the favorite there. But if the price on Herndon is certainly much more attractive.
Okay, and then in regards to wide receivers, so you said Cooper Kupp is your favorite. Do you like Cooper Kupp at 6,700 or Allen Robinson at 6,400?
Yeah. My gut says Robinson. Just comparing the projections I have for them. So Kupp, I have it about 7 targets, 5 catches, 60 yards, and for Robinson, 8, 5, and 70. Which I think makes sense. Which I think is right. He's probably a better bet for more volume, which at the end of the day is usually what I come back to.
Okay, and then for the wide receivers from Philly, I mean, I think Deshaun Jackson and Rager both make sense. I think I'd probably prefer playing Rager. Is there enough volume there, you think, from what you saw in week 1? Like, Dallas did a pretty good job against the Rams of getting a bunch of receivers involved. So with like the more concentrated target share, I guess it's not really that much more concentrated because you have the 4 options like Deshaun, Rager, Ertz, Goddard.
Yeah, I think that's something that I personally always sort of forget about for momentarily is including those tight ends when you're looking at the Eagles and teams like that. Rager had 4 targets last week, only caught 1 of them for 55 yards. Deshaun Jackson had 7, only caught 2 for 46. So I think the 4 targets for Rager is a little thin. I'd rather play Jackson out of those 2, even taking into account price, just because I think he'll see more targets. Greg Ward also had 7 targets on Sunday. He was a guy that played really well for the Eagles down the stretch when they just straight up ran out of wide receivers last year. So that's another guy that could grab some touches there. In the backfield, another guy we didn't mention is Corey Clement, who was hurt all of last year, but was a really big piece of their backfield during the Super Bowl year. So he's a guy that might hurt value for Sanders and Boston Scott and soak up a couple targets himself. So I like Jackson more so as like a run back with Goff and Woods or Kupp than with Wentz. Rager, I think you can play him. I don't think it's like a guy that out of your player pool, but certainly not a guy I want to have a ton of. I was overexposed to him last week. Got excited when he got some early targets, and then he kind of just did nothing.
So did they use him as a part of their 2 wide receiver sets, or was it Greg Ward and Deshaun?
I think it was Rager and Jackson mainly. Put it up.
Do you remember what percentage you had Rager at last week for ownership in your final run?
My ownership or the
Yours.
Fields?
Yours.
I think I had him at 8%.
Okay, and the field was probably what, like 5, and the projection for him this week is probably like 5 or less because it was a bad week.
I think last week he was projected at 4 because I think I targeted like I didn't want to go any higher than 2x, and he came in at 2, so I had a little more leverage than I expected.
Okay.
And then this week he is at 1%. So
do you think you'll run out 2% of him or no?
my first crunch I had 0. I haven't projected for 4 targets, which is like. Actually, wait. Yeah, so if that stays the same, he won't even be in my player pool. I want a guy who's projected for at least like 4.5, 5 targets at wide receiver.
Okay.
I did, and this is like a little bit arbitrary, but I did some back testing, and this is something that I sort of dawned on me as I was going through stuff after our stream last week. I think, generally speaking, something to keep in mind as you look for low ownership, off the radar plays. If you look at winning lineups, it's typically not like a 5th wide receiver that sort of comes out of nowhere to have a huge game. It's usually a guy and just people forget to play or think is in a bad matchup, and that reduces ownership. And you sort of look at it and you're like, oh man, how'd he get, Alvin Kamara at 5%? Like, why didn't people play him just because he's going up against whoever's good at run defense this year? So I think that for that reason, last week, week 1, you don't know really people's roles, so I had a little bit bigger player pool than I typically do. But going forward, I think I'm going to go back to keeping it pretty tight in terms of who I'm willing to play based on expected volume.
All right, sounds good. Let's go to the next game, Jacksonville at Tennessee. Jacksonville's plus 290, Tennessee is minus 345. Do you have a team that you would prefer to talk about?
I'll take Tennessee.
All right, so I'll start off with Jacksonville. So Jacksonville obviously beat the Colts last week in a pretty surprising upset, considering how many people were betting on Indianapolis. Indianapolis was thought of as one of the safer bets on the money line and lost outright. Gardner Minshew had a crazy game in terms of passing efficiency and accuracy. 19 out of 20 attempts were completed. James Robinson got every single carry, I think, from the backfield. If I'm remembering correctly, I think at most one other carry went to somebody else.
I think they gave Chenault a couple carries, but I don't even know if he technically counts. He's more like
I think I did see that in the box score. I think you're right. Chris Thompson is a player that I like, but I can't continuously play Chris Thompson just because I like Chris Thompson. It needs to be in a better spot, I guess, or there needs to be some more volume before I can actually make that play. We were correct last week about the number of wide receivers that were going to be involved with the Jaguars. So Chark, Keelan Cole, Chenault, and even Colin Johnson and Chris Conley were involved in one way or another. D.D. Westbrook was a healthy scratch, I think, right? Which was kind of surprising. It's kind of insane. Like, D.D. Westbrook was, a third-round pick out of Oklahoma, was thought of as being a good player. Had a couple good fantasy seasons. I guess there's just something they don't like about him. I don't know. But DJ Chark, I think, is a good player overall. I'd probably still want to get some exposure to DJ Chark over the field until he hits like 7,000 or the cost becomes prohibitive. This might not be a good spot to do it, though. They might just not have enough volume in the passing game, and Tennessee's also a good defense. So that's kind of scary. I'm not playing Tyler Eifert. I'm not playing Jaguars defense. The only way that I would kind of play this game from a betting perspective is taking them at +8 or even the money line. Like, I like Gardner Minshew a lot. I think that he is a better real-life quarterback than a fantasy quarterback. Has a better impact on his team's real-life odds of winning a game as opposed to the...
Moxie.
Yeah, Moxie. Yeah, he's a hard worker.
No, I mean, like, I say it somewhat facetiously, but like I do mean it.
Yeah.
I think he does. Like, and I think that, I'm a analytical minded person in all things, and I'm a big stats guy for sports purposes. But I think that I think that analytic people who sort of dismiss the human element of stuff are missing a piece.
Yeah.
I think that confidence from Minshew can be contagious and is important to what he does, in addition to being I agree with your breakdown there that I think he's a better real life quarterback than fantasy quarterback, but by Matt Harmon on Twitter posted a thing out with the top 5 and bottom 5 QBs in terms of on target or accurate targets in week 1, and Minshew was first in the league with like 95% of his targets of his attempts were on target.
Yeah.
Which I doubt he'll finish first, but he was also accurate last year. Does a really good job of navigating the pocket. If you listen to some of the film guys who look at him, so he does a lot of things well. Agree on Chark, and also agree that this might not be the best week for that breakout game. Have a lot of respect for this Titans secondary and defense as a whole. Logan Ryan and Malcolm Brown have played really well for them. I think that maybe a silver lining for Chark is that if you're going to attack Tennessee, you want to attack them outside. Logan Ryan's been a beast in the slot the last couple of years, and they also have really, really good safety play. So the center of the field can be a bit treacherous when the Titans are on defense. On the offensive side, A.J. Brown was ruled out earlier today, according to Mike Vrabel. So that condenses this passing game a bit. I think that the play that I've seen some people talking about on Twitter is Corey Davis. We talked about him last week.
Well, that's because we're geniuses.
Of course. Unfortunately, he was not on the main slate and couldn't really exploit that. So I don't mind going back to the well. I think that those two factors combined, along with a decent price, if I am not mistaken, will probably put ownership higher than I want it to be. So I'll be thinking, I think this is one of those sort of linchpin points of the slate, is sort of what you want to do with Davis. My initial gut is to fade, or not fully fade him, but to try to be under the field on him. Jonnu Smith is another guy that I really like here and would probably be the guy I would take in the passing game. I think ownership will be inflated on him too, but maybe not as much as Davis. Okay. Humphrey's got a bunch of targets, but I'll probably stay away from him. They also have some burners on the outside that will probably be the new guy in 3 wide receiver sets. Khalif Raymond, I think, is one, and I forget who else they have out there.
Hollister.
But,
Cody Hollister.
Yes. I think you could throw those guys in if you want to throw a flyer, but you're hoping for them to just catch a bomb and pay off. That's not my preferred approach.
Yeah.
And then I think, as always, you can come back to Derrick Henry. There's a bunch of stats about how he just road grades the Jaguars every time he plays them, especially in their most recent matchups. I don't like to play Derrick Henry just because he doesn't get the targets, and you need that touchdown equity for him to really have a huge game. But he could get it here, so I'll have some of him, but will probably lean towards some of the other high price running backs and go with a little bit of Jonnu Smith and some Titans D here.
So what do you think about Tannehill here?
I think he's okay. He's not a guy I like to play.
Me neither.
Just because I think they're, if they get ahead, they're gonna tuck it and run. So he's not going to be a core play for you. This game isn't going to be a core game for you because, like you're saying, that a lot of the value is going to come from this game. So having an opinion on the game is very important, but it's not like a stackable game. So I guess not so much that the value will come from this, but I think that there will be a lot of ownership here, and it's
Derrick Henry, Corey Davis because of pricing.
Exactly,
yeah.
And the sort of, it's like, if you want to play the Titans, you're gonna have to get different elsewhere. But if you fade the Titans, you can probably play chalk at other places and get different with your quarterback wide receiver stack or whatever you do there.
Yeah.
I think I like that way better than trying to figure out banking on Tannehill, who right now, what I have has him projected for 32 attempts. Give me at what is he at 59? I think we talked Stafford. I think it was the same price. I like Stafford better at that price.
I think Stafford was 6,200. But basically, I guess the way that I'm looking at it is last week the Colts attacked the Jaguars by passing to the running back. Nyheim Hines had a crazy game. Derrick Henry will still be that guy that gets those kinds of dump off passes. and can break long runs or can still have extremely big plays, catching like a dump off because the guy's like 1,000,000 pounds and fast and just insane. So I do think that, like, I know that you're saying a lot of the there are going to be a lot of relatively popular game plays from this game. So if you were going to lean into the ownership and kind of say to yourself, I know that these are going to be owned, so instead of like matching the field or something, I'll just throw together some tournament lineups to try to play off of that, like where you try to get Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry Ryan Tannehill plus Derrick Henry, Corey Davis, or Jonnu Smith, two of those players, and then bring it back with one other player from Jacksonville or something like that. Wouldn't that be a good way to get leverage for tournaments? Or it'd be difficult if it would be difficult to get leverage because of how owned the players are going to be.
No, I think that so I guess the honest answer probably I don't know. But I don't know if this is accurate, but I would expect that cross correlations at running back are going to be less than, from an ownership perspective, than with a tight end or wide receiver. So that, I think that like Drew Brees and Alvin Kamara on a week that they are anticipated to be highly owned, you might be increasing the chalkiness of your lineup by playing them together. But I think playing Tannehill and Henry together, like if your expectation is the Titans just crush here, I think that playing Tannehill and Henry then makes sense, and I think putting them together would probably differentiate rather than put you further aligned with the field.
Yeah, I think I kind of do like the spot here. I'm just trying to figure out, like, am I going to if I think to myself, the Titans win a low scoring game where they just like control the clock and destroy Jacksonville that way, like obviously there's not going to be a ton of fantasy goodness. All of the ownership from this game is going to like just turn into nothing. If the game is close because people are underestimating the Jaguars, then it'll easily go well, maybe not easily go over, but it would go over, like in a 27-24 kind of game, or like 31-24, where like there actually is some fantasy goodness from both sides in this game. Because like the fact that Jacksonville played well against the Colts have a relatively good defense. Like, do you think that the Colts defense is significantly worse than the Titans? Because they put up, like 30 points? Were any of those points scored from the defense? Or was it just like Minshew leading them on longer drives? Were there were a decent amount of turnovers, I guess, because of Phillip Rivers? That's where I think the potential upside is in this game, is if it stays kind of close. Like, that's how Derrick Henry goes out of control, right? You don't want this game, if you're going to roster Derrick Henry at 20% or 30%, you don't want the game to be 21-0 or 17-0.
I think you just want them to win. You just can't have the Titans behind in the second half, because then that's when they will be forced to throw. And maybe even behind by 2 scores is a better sort of litmus test there. But I think that's why Henry is if I'm going to play someone on the Titans, I prefer Henry. There's just a lot more game scripts here where he is fantasy viable. I don't see a ton of scenarios where Tannehill throws and throws and throws. This game doesn't scream shootout to me.
I guess.
Which is sort of what you need, I think between their philosophy and their sort of talent differential, it just feels like there's a lot of ways here for Tannehill to flame out. That being said, that was like my view the entire second half of last season, and he had a bunch of weeks where you could win with him. So it's not to say that it won't happen. I'm willing to lose that way is probably the way to frame that.
Yeah. So do you want Derrick Henry in the almost perfect lineup?
His price is what, 79?
Yeah.
I like him at that price better than Miles Sanders at 57.
I've got him at 6,000.
Miles Sanders?
Yeah.
I was just going off of memory.
Okay. All right. I was like, I'm getting concerned because it's like there was a few times where like you're like looking at the screen and you're like, this number. I'm like, are we on different slates or something? But
no, every single time I've been wrong about price, I'm trying to remember what we talked about before. So for people listening, what Pikel says Price is correct, and what I say is wrong.
All right. So
maybe that's why I haven't won one of these slates in a while.
So for Jonnu, do you like Jonnu more than Herndon or still Herndon?
Jonnu's price, I will actually look at it this time.
4,200. Herndon 3,400.
I'd rather play. I think I'd rather play Henry and Herndon than someone
besides Henry plus a random
Smith and a running back for 76 and less. Yeah.
Okay, and then Corey Davis, you don't think that it's enough to get him in there? You'd prefer to take the Derrick Henry side. In terms of DJ Chark, you're not playing Chark over Marvin Jones or Allen Robinson, right?
No, I don't think so. Like, I'll have a couple Tennessee stacks, just because of the number of lineups that I'll be playing.
Yeah.
And Corey Davis will be in those, because I like him as a talent, $4,000, and he's going to get presumably lead the team in targets. And I would, if I'm going to bring it back, I think the only guy that really makes sense to bring those back with on the Jacksonville side is Chark. Maybe Shenault if you want to get cute, but I think Chark is the volume bet. I think Chanel is probably a trap after the touchdown last week.
Yeah, he'll probably turn into one of those guys who scores like a touchdown 5 weeks in a row, and everybody feels like they were right the whole time. But yeah, I agree with you about Tennessee. I was on the wrong side of Tennessee a lot last year. I didn't really believe in it, but I think that Tannehill, I feel like it's probably just me being afraid of missing it again, and like trying to convince myself that it's going to be an actual thing. And a lot of people are talking up Derrick Henry's role in the passing game, where like he's actually going to be used if they do get behind. Darrington Evans is out for this game. He is their rookie, who I'm actually pretty high on. Like he had really good. He was a pretty good receiver out of the backfield in college, and a lot of the people from the Titans were talking him up. So especially without him being there, maybe there is more resistance for Derrick Henry in that game script. So like I'm the kind of guy never play Tannehill, never play Henry, but this is the kind of week where I feel like you're going to be different enough. By stacking it, where like I might actually run them out in some of my GPP lineups. But we'll go to the next game, which is Carolina Tampa Bay.
The one thing I'll add there,
sure,
and this is another general point. So I did spent a bunch of time this week doing some bring downs on some roster construction backtest stuff that I've looked at in the past. So this pulls the winning. This is the universe of lineups. Here is the winning lineup on the biggest, the GPP with the highest prize pool on every slate that I could find going back to 2017. Okay. So it's every main slate and some smaller slates on those same weeks. On slates with at least 10 games, there have been over 95% of the winning lineups have had only less than 5% of the lineups have had a quarterback running back stack that did not also have a wide receiver or tight end from the same team with it.
Yeah.
So, and I think I would have to go back and look, but I think both of those times it's been like Breeze, Kamara, Jones, Barkley, or a running back that is very heavily involved in the passing game. So if you are going to play Tannehill and Henry together, put Corey Davis or Jonnu Smith in there, because the game script you want is Tannehill throws to get them ahead, and then Henry smashes in the second half. Don't play Tannehill and Henry together without another Titan.
Yep. Okay, that's kind of what I was getting at, I guess. But that's a good way to elucidate the point. So Carolina, Tampa Bay. I think I'd rather talk about the Panthers. So Carolina at Tampa Bay. Carolina's plus 310. Tampa Bay is minus 375. The over-under is 47.5. The spread is 9 points. Tom Brady had a bad week last week. I don't think that's going to happen 2 weeks in a row unless he is completely done. So I don't know. There's really no way to know that before this game. And even if he has a bad game, it doesn't mean he's done. But I'm doing Carolina. So Teddy Bridgewater, I don't want to play him at 5,800 against the Buccaneers. And the reason is because the Buccaneers are one of the best run defenses in the NFL, right? I think that last year they gave up the least yards per carry, or one of the teams with the lowest yards per carry. And I'm pretty sure they did a good job against Christian McCaffrey last year as well in the running game. He probably still got a lot of PPR points and was fine. So if you could look up information about Christian McCaffrey against the Buccaneers last year, that would be helpful. He's still 10,000. Scored 28.5 points last week against Oakland. Let's see. 23 attempts, only 4 targets. Had 2 touchdowns. DJ Moore is going to be in play basically every single week. Robbie Anderson is going to be in play every week as like a long touchdown kind of guy. At 5,200, it's a lot more difficult to fit him into your roster when his volume probably isn't going to be great week to week. But he had 8 targets last week. That might have something to do with being against the Raiders. But I don't know. I don't think I like paying for 5,000 for Robbie Anderson type receivers. Curtis Samuel also had 8 targets. It didn't have the touchdown, so he's probably a better spot to go. We'll have less ownership, obviously. And then DJ Moore had 9 targets, 4 receptions. He's the number 1 option in this offense. This is the kind of guy that you were talking about, where people will forget, oh, DJ Moore plays football, and then he goes out there and has a really good game at some point in the next few weeks. There is some talk about Ian Thomas, but I'm not an Ian Thomas player. And at 3,200, you're not even getting enough discount from Herndon. I think Herndon's probably still the better play. So I don't think I'll be playing McCaffrey. It's not my style. I'm not playing Ian Thomas, not playing Robbie Anderson. I might have DJ Moore. I might have Curtis Samuel, but I don't think I'm going to have much exposure to this game at all.
Yeah, so to your point, Tampa Bay was like the one team that figured out how to shut down Christian McCaffrey last year.
Yeah.
In the 2 games against Tampa Bay combined, he had 38 carries for 68 yards.
Yeah.
Which is, if you don't want to do the math there, less than 2 yards per carry.
Yep.
And he had 11 targets, 6 catches, and 42 yards through the air. Two touchdowns in the second game, but it's 57 total yards. So I think that fading McCaffrey is viable here. Always risking that, obviously, just given his enormous role in this offense. And so I'll probably want to be above the field, just given that it's. I think it'll lead to a very different roster construction this week. Given how much more expensive he is than even the second highest priced running back, and the potential, but it's certainly not an expected ceiling game for him. DJ Moore, I think, is like through the roof talent. He's still only 21 or 22 years old, and if you look at age-based numbers, particularly for college prospects, are a very big, for wide receiver prospects, is a very high indicator of NFL success. And DJ Moore just smashed all of these age-based metrics when he was coming into the draft. So he's a guy that I love. I think he's going to be one of the best receivers in the league for a long time to come. So definitely, I never mind getting him in my lineup. But something we talked about last week, Tampa Bay's secondary was exploitable last year, but looked really good against the Rams. They have some young guys that are super, talented athletes. So I think that's just something to keep an eye on. I'm not going to fade this week because of it, but if they keep that up, I think we'll have to just sort of change our expectations of this Tampa Bay secondary. And then the last thing there, just to put some numbers to what you said, and it's something we talked about last week. The Bucs put more men in the box and commit more resources to the run than pretty much any team in the league. Where'd that go? Over the last, I think this is last 3 seasons, running plays on 1st and 10 against 8 men in the box, 3.9 yards per carry, 7 men, 4.4, 6 men, 4.8, 5 men, 5.4. So you're getting extra half a yard per carry for every man you take out of the box on average. So it makes all the difference in the world. Sort of talent agnostic. And then, for a guy like McCaffrey, even that talent won't necessarily overcome 2 extra guys being down there to stop him. On the Tampa Bay side, I'll keep this piece quick since I added on a bunch there. I'm not for me, I want Brady to show it to me before I play him.
Okay.
Mike Evans is still a little gimpy with the hamstring. Chris Godwin has been downgraded to doubtful, so there is a lot of value here. maybe see them go with some more 2 tight end sets. So OJ Howard, I don't mind. I wish he didn't score a touchdown this last week.
And look good in general, yeah.
Yeah, for this, I think that it would have been a much more attractive play to me if you could have gotten him a little bit more sneakily. Same thing with Scotty Miller. He got a ton of targets last week. Seems to be the archetype of receiver that we associate with Brady. I don't know if that will bear fruit, but I also like him as a talent. I think he's a legit NFL receiver. Not out of this world, but he sort of took Adam Humphrey's job when Humphreys got a big free agent contract in Tennessee, and I think he could be that sort of caliber of player, or people I trust say he could be. Is probably a better way to frame that. So that's that. Look, I think that I don't trust that Evans is fully healthy, but I'll play a little bit of him just because the price is at 64 and he's a mid sevens receiver usually. I'll have a little bit of OJ Howard. And I do like Ronald Jones as a play. Carolina is a team that back half of last season just got smashed on the ground. They've changed things up on defense, but Jones got enough volume in week 1 that I trust him to be the lead guy in this backfield. Same thing, we're coming to week 1. I was like, show it to me before I trust what Bruce Arians was saying.
Yeah.
In his press conferences as they signed all these other running backs.
Yeah, I think the thing with Ronald Jones is that everybody chasing Josh Jacobs' success against the Panthers is going to end up on him, which kind of scares me. His ownership is
although I think just I guess the flip side of that would be that the Jacobs performance you could take as evidence that the Panthers haven't really fixed what was wrong with their run defense. There's a little bit of a counterbalance there, but I certainly agree it's gonna drive ownership way up.
Yeah, so right now it's projected for 11% at 5,200. I mean, that's a pretty good price in general. Like if he is getting that workload, that's completely fine. I think Mike Evans is a great play. I probably prefer Mike Evans over Allen Robinson straight up. They're both at the same price. I think that Mike Evans was just a decoy last week, and the fact that he was able to play the decoy role against Marshawn Lattimore with his bad hamstring, I think that's probably a good sign for him, for his ability to play this week with like an additional week of being going through practice. They said he doesn't have an injury designation anymore, so I don't know. I guess they theoretically could be lying about it, but I think it's good.
No, look, I think I did not realize he wasn't on the injury report. I just know sort of what I've seen on like the scroll on ESPN or NFL Network or something.
He did look he did look a little tentative when he was walking around in that game on Sunday, which is why it was so obvious that he was like a decoy. But
right, but yeah, I think that's a great sign for him. And I think there's always risk in sort of taking these like Twitter reports of Mike Evans looks great on the field before the game, cutting like an old self. I'm sure I'm sure you've sat there and studied Mike Evans' gait. Sideline reporter for NBC. But I think that's all sort of the more we hear things like that, it's a fact and a good fact if you want to play Evans. So the more of that type of stuff we hear, the more I'll get on him here. I think that if he was fully healthy. Without Godwin, he could be he could be a volume monster here.
So, do you like Ronald Jones for the almost perfect lineup or not?
Yeah, I think I would put him in there. I think at that price, he's my favorite RB2 at this point that we've talked about.
Okay.
Currently projected in the ownership I'm looking at 10%. My first run of crunches, I got him in about 20% of my lineups. I'd be totally fine being twice the field on him.
Okay.
So I'm cool with that.
And then Mike Evans is 7.5%. So do you like? What do you think Mike Evans versus Allen Robinson? Because I guess you don't really want to play both, right? You don't want to play Ronald Jones and Mike Evans. So I guess your affinity for Ronald Jones is going to move you away from Mike Evans.
That's exactly where I was going to go. And the health concern. If we find out, or if you want to assume that Evans is fully healthy, in a vacuum, I probably do like him better than Allen Robinson in this matchup. But I'd rather take Jones and Robinson than Evans and David Montgomery or whoever the running back is you want to plug in there at about the same price.
Yeah, so I think the fact, like what we've discussed so far, Tom Brady didn't look great last week, somewhat concerning. A lot of people would be like, prove it to me. The point that you said earlier about quarterback plus running back, you kind of need the additional wide receiver. I don't think many people will go that direction this week. If I had to choose personally between playing Mike Evans at reduced ownership coming off of an injury against Ronald Jones, I'd probably think the Mike Evans play is better, like in a vacuum. But I'm afraid of Ronald Jones because of the Josh Jacobs stuff, and he had a pretty good workload last week. So I'm kind of stuck. Like, my gut says play Mike Evans, not Ronald Jones, is basically where I'm coming out there. But we can go.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like if I slept through Sunday and woke up on Monday morning and saw that, and if you told me that a skill player on the Bucks had a 40-point game, I'd be like, probably Mike Evans, right? I wouldn't guess that it was Jones. I think that I'd probably give Jones a higher probability of getting to 20, just given the uncertainty about Evans at this point. But look, Evans, we know, can have just huge games. He's a physical beast. The types of patterns he runs, he checks all the boxes. So
Yeah.
I don't mind that play at all.
All right, next game, Denver against Pittsburgh. We have Denver plus 275, Pittsburgh minus 335. Over-under is 40.5, and the spread is 7. I guess that probably has a lot to do with the fact that Denver played in a really low-scoring game in the second game of Monday Night Football. Denver shouldn't have a good defense, though, because, well, that's not necessarily true. But they are missing a couple key players on defense, so I don't think it really is a downgrade for the Pittsburgh side. And the Giants were able to move the ball through the air against Pittsburgh. Denver is probably still thought of as a running team because of how they used to just like jam Phillip Lindsay when they're at home. But this is a road game. Drew Lock, I don't remember last season what his best game looked like in terms of like his passing upside, but I think that Drew Lock is kind of a good tournament play if you think they have chances to keep the game close. A lot of people are high.
One monster last year.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I think Jerry Jeudy is a very interesting play. He looked good. He didn't get a lot of targets or anything, but it was a low-scoring game. If Cortland Sutton is back, you kind of need Cortland Sutton to be back in order to make the Drew Lock play, I think, because it's more threats that Pittsburgh has to respect outside of Jerry Jeudy and Noah Fant. But those are three interesting plays in my opinion. So I do like the passing side of things here. Melvin Gordon, I think, is a good play at 5,200. I'd probably actually no, he's not. What am I saying? Pittsburgh's defense, I'm not playing running backs against them until somebody like just goes off, because the fact that they bottled up Saquon, it's not really that. I think it was probably just the Giants line is still pretty bad at run blocking, but Melvin Gordon is going to get a lot of extra touches. Phillip Lindsay's out. So Melvin Gordon has shown that he can get the receiving work as well. So this is another spot where you can get Drew Lock, Melvin Gordon, Jerry Jeudy. Drew Lock, Melvin Gordon, Cortland Sutton coming off of an injury. Melvin Gordon, Noah Fant, Drew Lock. I mean, those are at least interesting to me. I don't know if they are good plays or not. If I was running 150, I would definitely have a couple of them, I think. But as somebody who doesn't typically run 150 lineups, it's probably like the kind of play that I shouldn't make, At least that's how I look at it.
No, actually, yeah, this was a spot that I had sort of flagged for myself even before we started talking here, so I really like that. Expected to be super low owned. The only guy here among their skill guys that is projected right now, and what I'm looking at above 1% is Gordon, who's at 8%. I do like Gordon, just given that without Lindsay, it's probably one of the few weeks where we'll have a pretty more certainty on his volume. So I don't mind going there. And like you said, he's a guy that gets red zone work, gets passing game work. So there's a lot of ways for him to pay off. But I love the passing game here and Jeudy in particular. The Steelers last year had the number 9 defense in the league against boundary wide receivers and the number 32 defense against slot receivers. And this is something we mentioned last week. They play a base 3-4 defense, and they substitute personnel much less than your typical NFL defense. And what ends up happening is if the other team is in a 3 wide receiver set, you end up with safeties and linebackers matched up with the 3rd wide receiver. In week 1, Jerry Jeudy, even without Cortland Sutton, ran pretty much all of the slot routes for the Broncos. When they would go to 3 wide receiver formations, they would bump him down in the slot and move Deshaun Hamilton and Tim Patrick, or I forget who the other guy they were playing was, but would move them to the outside.
I guess
So
KJ
I
Hamler
think
didn't play.
Hamler would have been the guy, I guess, too. But regardless, I think your point about Sutton is spot on. Judy didn't do as much as you would like to see with those targets on Sunday, but he did have 9 total. I think 8 of them came when he was in the slot. I think Sutton is a beast. I think he's matchup proof to the, or, in the sense that you can play him against anybody. So I think out of the other guy that ran a bunch of slot routes for the Broncos is Noah Fant, who's sort of a flex tight end type guy, super talented. So I love the passing game stack here. There's some risk that the Steelers come in and the Broncos offensive line can't hold up and they fall apart. So agree with the caution too. But I definitely want to be over the field on the Broncos. On the Steelers side, I like the Broncos defense. I think once they get those guys back, Von Miller and a few of the other guys up front, that they could be pretty good.
Is Miller done for the year though? Is he done for the year?
Is he done for the year? I have no idea, honestly.
I'll check while you talk about it.
I'm actually have the injury report pulled up. Yeah, this is just this week, so it doesn't have long-term injuries. But so Mark Barron is another guy who played safety at Alabama. They've moved him to linebacker. Or the Rams moved him to linebacker, plays linebacker now. But yeah, so I think that the narrative about the Pittsburgh offense, I believe. I think that the quarterback play was the issue last year, and that having a competent NFL quarterback will make this offense real again. David DeCastro, who's a really good guard for the Steelers, is out again. I think this offense could get even better once they get healthy on the offensive line. I don't think it really matters who's at running back, but I don't want to play Benny Snell. I would play James Conner just because of their skill sets and the additional work that Conner gets in the passing game. I was a little surprised that Jalen Samuels didn't get more work on Sunday. When Conner missed time last year, he was a guy that had a big role in a few games, and even when Snell was playing, was still the third down passing game guy. So that's another reason that I would not play Benny Snell, even if Conner sits, or wouldn't play a lot of them. But I do like the Pittsburgh side of this passing game as well. Here, Deontay Johnson was in a ton of my lineups in this first crunch, mainly just as a price play. I will want to get more of Juju. He's another guy that scored touchdowns on a primetime slate, so that'll drive up ownership a little bit, I assume, and sort of wish he didn't do it so that I could get in on that first big game for him.
Yeah. But
he's a guy that I expect to have a bounce back season after a disappointing 2019. So that I'm on I think that either way you want to run it, Pittsburgh with a Bronco bringing it back, or Broncos with a Steeler running it back. I like stacking up this game with the passing games. I'll probably avoid both backfields, but get some Gordon in there just because of the volume.
So do you prefer one of these stacks over Aaron Rodgers, Davante Adams, and Marvin Jones? So basically, Aaron Rodgers 6,900, Drew Lock is 5,400, Ben Roethlisberger 6,300. In terms of the wide receivers, Davante Adams 8,100, Marvin Jones 5,700, or you can go to Juju Smith-Schuster, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Deontay Johnson. So I think there's 4 good options there. Melvin Gordon, you could do it you can do a same price pivot away from Ronald Jones, something like that. The tight ends are definitely in play.
I think that the Packers stack is the better bet to score more. But I would score more, raw fantasy points. But I think that I would, from like a build perspective, leaning towards something similar to last week, and paying up a little bit at running back, which I think the Steelers Broncos game would give you a better path for. So I might make the switch. And if we're going like perfect lineup, I don't think Lock's the guy. But if we're saying like let's put together a lineup that could win a GPP, I think that Lock, Sutton, Dewey, Juju is a very interesting 4-man stack.
All right. So
Or and if Sutton doesn't play, I like the Broncos significantly less. Still want some, but I think that it just you get the condensed targets, but you get a lot more attention on those inside guys. Judy plus Fant, I like a little bit less just because I think they'll be doing similar things in that offense and might sort of cannibalize each other a little bit. So I'd prefer Sutton and Fant or Sutton and Judy with a Steeler and Lock than Judy and Fant together. But if Sutton sits, I think you'll get enough volume there that you could do it.
all right. So I made the switch in the almost perfect lineup. We're gonna play Drew Lock. We're gonna play Juju Smith-Schuster. We're gonna put in Cortland Sutton because this is all based. This lineup is only gonna work. You think if Cortland Sutton actually does play, right?
Yeah, I think that
That's your preferred way. That's your preferred.
Yeah.
And
I
then
think it's a much better line.
And then I'm making the executive decision in getting rid of Ronald Jones, who sucks, for Melvin Gordon, who will get a receiving touchdown this week. That's the kind of play we need. So that would allow us to go. Actually, we can't even go Jonnu either way because we still have Derrick Henry. But I think that's a good way to go about that game. So we are in agreement there. So unless you have anything else, we can go Atlanta, Dallas.
Yeah.
All right, Atlanta at Dallas. Atlanta is plus 185. Dallas is minus 215. The over/under is 53.5, and the spread is 5 points. So Atlanta against Seattle. Having your first game be against Seattle when they're letting Russ throw the ball is probably pretty feels bad, but I think that Atlanta is going to be a pretty good team. I've been high on Atlanta for the past few years. I was listening to some other podcast, and they were talking about how Atlanta is a sub 500 team for the past couple of years, but they've been missing some of their most important defenders every single year. So I'm more of the opinion that the Falcons are actually a good team that's had bad injury luck and has good upside for this season. So I'd rather be on the Falcons than off of the Falcons to start the year. Matt Ryan's at 6,600. That's a little expensive. Todd Gurley, I still think has pretty good upside. Didn't really get it done against the Seahawks, but I think that we will have a lot of good opportunities to play Todd Gurley with the upside of winning tournaments. Julio is questionable at 7,400. Oh no, they've taken away the injury designation, so Julio will play this week at 7,400. Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage, all three of them were targeted 12 times last week. Hayden Hurst had some work, but he's at 4,600. I don't think that I could convince myself to play Hayden Hurst over Noah Fant at 200 less, or Herndon at 3,400, or Jonnu at 4,200, I think it was, basically in the same price range. So maybe Hayden Hurst is a sneaky play, but I think if you're going... What'd you say?
I love Hayden Hurst this week.
Okay. Is that a matchup thing, or is that just the fact that he's close to a couple other players that'll be a lot higher owned?
Matchup.
Go on.
The Cowboys run a scheme that sort of takes away your boundary guys and gives up targets to your tight end and running back, and then sort of tackles. Scheme that you see with a couple different teams. Last year, the Cowboys, find this, averaged allowed 3.7 fantasy points per game above average, which was second in the league to the Cardinals at the tight end position. So 31st in the league, and gave up I guess an average amount of tight end one games. Don't really stand out there, but yeah. So the tight ends are a position that the Cowboys are a team that I target the tight end position against. I think that, as you said, the wide receivers got a ton of targets for this team last week. I think that they'll be sort of the talk of the town, and that Hurst will go a little bit under the radar for that reason.
Sure.
He ran a bunch of routes from the slot, so they're certainly using him as a receiving hybrid type guy, which I think he's in the Austin Hooper role is sort of what that means to me. I think there are more mouths to feed, so I don't expect him to have the same season that Hooper did last year. But I expect him to run those routes and sort of he has the potential to have some of those big games that Hooper did. And he's just, I mentioned last week, he's a guy that a player that I like. He's a two-sport guy. Liked him coming out of the draft. So he's, someone that my priors sort of like him as a talent. Now he has a role. And all the other, I think the rest of these Falcons will be in play pretty much every week. If this offense keeps playing the way that it looks like it'll play.
Yeah.
Agree with you on the Falcons being an underrated team. I came up with like a power ranking system last year that sort of just combined like the main metric of a bunch of different sites. So it takes the overall PF upgrade, a point differential metric, DVOA from Football Outsiders, and the 538 ELO, and then mashes it all together. And by that, Atlanta was at the end of the season rated as the best team that missed the playoffs. So if you remember last season, they were like, I don't know, 4-10 or 3-9 or something, and then really played well down the stretch once they started to get a little bit healthier. So yeah, I'm down with that. I think this should be a good game. On the Cowboys side, the Falcons are a team that is given up a few, allowed a decent amount of passing work to running backs in the past. And we saw in week 1 that Zeke had more targets, or sort of had a decent volume of targets, more in line with the work we saw him get in 2018 than 2019, which I think is sort of the key for him to unlock him from being in like that 1B tier of running backs to really being like at the top of the heap with your Saquons and McCaffrey might be in class by himself always, but at least being in the conversation there. So Zeke is a guy that I love this week. I think he's going to get the work. I think that he could be used in both phases. Dak was my highest owned quarterback in my first crunch. Is ranked in the Fantasy Pros composite expert rankings right now as the number 2.5 quarterback, highest rated on the slate. I think might be behind somebody. I don't have all the quarterbacks here now that I've realized it. But anyway, so I think this will be a popular play. All of the Cowboys and their receivers are expected to be chalk. I don't mind any of them, but don't love any of them. If I had to pick one of the receivers, I'd probably go with Gallup just because he had the quietest game last week and might get some ownership discount there. But I think that of the Cowboys, I'm definitely going to squeeze that Dak ownership. I'll want to be at the field, maybe a little above, which is currently 12. And Zeke is my favorite play on the Cowboys side.
If you ever say squeeze the Dak again, squeeze that Dak or squeeze the Dak, we should make some T-shirts. That is going to make somebody a lot of money. But so I got a message from somebody who's been following me for a couple months, originally from League of Legends, but has watched some of our videos. And he sent me a message on Twitter I'm going to read about PFF. So he said, apropos PFF and analytics Muppets, I mean, a little inflammatory in general, have an irrational hatred of Zeke because they assume that each play is an independent trial. They also overvalue long runs. While it is true that Zeke gets what's blocked and then squeezes an extra couple of yards, running plays are, by design, lower variance. He has a higher median and 25th percentile yardage gained per rush than other running backs because he does his job first, then looks for extra yardage. In contrast, running backs like Saquon are actually less valuable because he has a lower median gain. Handing the ball to Zeke pretty much guarantees you no worse than 2nd and 8 and likely gets you to 2nd and 6 or 7. Handing it to Zeke twice generally gives you 3rd and 6 at worst or 3rd and 3/4 or better, more probable than not. With Saquon, the equivalent scenarios are 2nd and 9, 2nd and 8, 3rd and 8, and 3rd and 6 respectively. So the reason I wanted to bring that up is because I appreciate that kind of actual insight. Like, obviously he started off being a little douchey about it, but I mean, like, we kind of have that relationship where I just, like, that's how our relationship started with me and this guy. But I think it's good information. I think that what you were saying about Zeke potentially having higher receiving upside in this game is also a good thing, right? So if we think that someone, oh, so this was Mr. Patrick, by the way, on Twitter. If he's right, if you're both right, then Zeke should still have a good impact in the running game, and then also has higher upside in the receiving game out of the backfield. Last week, Chris Carson had 2 receiving touchdowns. It doesn't mean that like Zeke's going to have 2 receiving touchdowns, but it means that the opportunity is there because somebody else has seen a team exploit it already in week 1. And typically teams don't miss that kind of thing. So if there's something in the film that suggests like throwing into the flat to somebody like Chris Carson or Zeke is a good play to get a potential touchdown or just a big chunk play, like teams are going to do it over and over again until Atlanta proves they can stop it. So I think that is interesting. I typically don't play Zeke. In general, when I build lineups, I think I'm more like spend money on receivers and then try to get some like lower owned running backs. But I do think that Zeke is a good play. Who do you like more, Zeke or Derrick Henry?
As a fantasy play this week,
Yep.
I like Zeke.
So we'll switch that out. 300 more.
So actually, So what I was gonna say is, I wouldn't want to play 3 Broncos together. I think that with the salary savings from the Broncos guys, you go jam them in, and Henry and Zeke both at running back.
So I will remove Gordon. So that leaves us with 3,100 for a flex and a defense, but we'll figure that out later. So did you have anything?
You go cheap at D, you still have room there.
Yeah. Did you wait? What was that? You said go lower at D.
If you go cheap at D, you still have a little more room for that flex.
Yeah. So did you have a response to what Mr. Patrick said, or did you think it was relatively accurate?
Yeah. So I'm not familiar with like I can't speak to like the accurate, whether Zeke is, that's right. The like percentage of carries that he's putting his team in 2nd and 6. I don't doubt it. I think the main variable there that you need to keep in mind, and we talked about it, and I think if he's the analyticator that the first sentence made it sound like that maybe agrees is you got to take O-line play into account here, and so
They're banged up.
Zeke has had one of the best offensive lines in the league his entire career. Had one of the best his offensive line was probably better than the defensive line he was up against in every single game we saw him in at Ohio State. So you have that. Saquon, that's not been the case. The Giants have had one of the worst offensive lines in the league during his career. I think the description of them as backs is accurate. That Saquon, sort of after the huge rookie season, I think one of the knocks that people, or not knocks, but one of the reasons that he was generally projected as the number 1 pick in fantasy drafts, and there was a contingent of people that are saying no, it should be McCaffrey, and the knock against Saquon was so many of his yards came on these huge 50-yard plus runs, and that's just not sustainable. There was all these stats about like the only guy who would ever put up anything close to it in 2 straight years was Adrian Peterson, and even for him, he had a huge drop off after the season he had with all the big carries. Mm-hmm. I think the piece that I would add, and I was just actually pulling up, I was just looking at some like a win probability calculator. Like, sure, maybe like Zeke does put his team in 2nd and 7 more, but I don't even know if you can say that's better. If so, the scenario I pulled up here is 15 minutes to go in the 2nd quarter, 1st and 10 from your own 35. If you only gain 3 yards, if you gain 3 yards on 1st down, your win probability goes down. So I don't, just because that is true, I don't think it's necessarily true to say that is what's better for your team. I think that's still sort of implicit in that is this old school football mentality that 3 yards in a cloud of dust is the way to do it. Whereas maybe the way to do it is try to hit a home run every time you're up there. And if you go 3 and out, so be it. You'll score enough touchdowns to make it worthwhile. I think that's a debate, and I'm not saying the latter's right, but I think it's arguable. And then the other thing is that I think that for fantasy purposes, it's almost certainly true that you'd rather have the other guy, and that's kind of the frame, and that was sort of the frame that I was using that as a dig at Elliott, is that I'd rather have a guy who's trying to hit a home run on my fantasy team,
Yeah,
even if
especially
I'd rather
daily
have
fantasy.
the guy who, but certainly see the value in having a guy who does that. Benny Snell was a guy like they were talking about on Monday night, right? I think he's a poor man Zeke in that category. But there's value in a guy who can do that.
All right, cool. So, did you have anything else for Atlanta Dallas? Are there any receivers from this game you feel like should supplant Juju, Cortland Sutton, Allen Robinson?
Mm,
Like Calvin Ridley, 6,800. You're not even getting a good price discount on him. He already scored the 2 touchdown game, so it's going to be baked in for a long time. Cooper, 6,300. Gallup, 5,600. CeeDee Lamb, 4,700. I think that, I mean, what we're really talking about, I guess, is like, would we replace Allen Robinson with any of these players? Probably not.
no, especially with I'd rather play Zeke than make that swap.
All right, cool. Next up, we have Minnesota and Indianapolis. So Minnesota is plus 148, Indianapolis minus 167. The over under is 48.5. The spread is 3 currently. Do you have a preference?
No, I'll do either one.
All right, so
Whatever you would.
I'll take Minnesota. So Kirk 5,900 last week against Green Bay. Garbage time kind of salvaged this whole thing. If Gardner Minshew can do it, I think that Kirk Cousins can do it from like the Draftkings perspective. I guess the thing that scares me is Mike Zimmer. So I don't know if like Dalvin is going to be the number one option almost every single time. Last week, James Robinson got 63 yards on 16 carries or something like that, which isn't horrible. I think Dalvin Cook's obviously a better player. I don't think I want to pay 7,600 for him, so we're not playing him over Derrick Henry or Zeke. I don't think. You could convince me otherwise, I'm sure. Thielen at 7,200 versus Allen Robinson. We're probably on the Allen Robinson side, I'm guessing. Neither of the tight ends are very cheap. So I think it's probably a stay away for Minnesota in regards to the almost perfect lineup. I don't think Indianapolis is going to look like they did last week, and I don't think Minnesota is going to look like what they did last week. So I would think that the over probably has some value on it, or the under. Sorry. I don't think I like this game at all for the Minnesota side.
I do like Dalvin Cook as a play. And even though he burned me last week, I don't mind Irv Smith. The Colts are another one of these cover two teams that sort of takes away big plays and stuff to your wide receivers and lets you dink. It sort of forces you to dink and dunk and take it 5 yards at a time to the underneath guys. So I think that Cook could get a few extra targets here, although we did see Alexander Madison have an increased passing role game after having almost a non-existent one last year in week 1. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. But Saquon is projected at 3% ownership right now, and what I'm looking at, Dalvin Cook at 6%, while Zeke and Henry are at 20% apiece. So definitely a good pivot play from those other two guys if you want to get away from the chalk and get a little bit different at running back. And on the receivers, I already covered that. Thielen is a guy that I'm going to be staying away from for a little bit until he proves me wrong. And I think that the Vikings, they're not going to have a ton of passing game volume in most weeks, so I don't mind fading Cousins. On the Colts side, I think that this Vikings defense might be, its reputation might precede them, and that they might not really be as good as public perception.
Yep.
So I don't mind getting some of these Colts guys. T.Y. Hilton is a guy that I have my eye on. I think this Vikings secondary in particular is something that we could exploit. They got burned really, as I mentioned earlier, Devontae Adams just torched them in the slot,
Yep.
had both of his touchdowns from there. Paris Campbell ran basically all of the slot routes for the Colts last week and had a big game. T.Y. Hilton is a guy in the past that they've moved around in formations a little bit and gotten him open that way. particularly in tougher matchups. But I'll be interested to see what they do there. I think if Hilton's exclusively outside, maybe he doesn't have as much value long term, or for the season. But for the time being, I think I'm willing to assume that they move him around as they have in the past. And even if he's outside, I think Ty is always a guy that could go off.
Yeah.
So I like him after Campbell had the big game in week 1. And although it could be a trap, I like the idea of pivoting off of Jonathan Taylor, who's expected to be chalk, to Naheem Hines. That he's a guy that they always use in the passing game. Even last year and years past, one of the knocks on Marlon Mack has always been that the Colts, for whatever reason, always seem to send Naheem Hines in there when they're in the red zone. And so I think that if it was just last week he had those touchdowns, I think that would be a little bit more trappy than a guy that has had red zone success in the past, or has seen trust in the red zone in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So if he ends up getting the goal line work and the receiving game work, that's the guy you want.
Yeah.
And even if it's 50-50 in the red zone, I like Naheem Hines, even though he is pricey. He's like in the mid 5s.
Yeah, 5.3.
So he could end up being just an absolute tank if Taylor's the guy and like Naheem Hines is giving you 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
But I really like those two guys on the Indy side. Paris Campbell a little bit less, but I think he could be overowned. Rivers, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you need to play him.
Yeah.
You could, but I don't know. It feels like there's better options.
So what about Ty against Allen Robinson?
I think I go Ty there. I see more scenarios where Ty is putting up 25, 30 points just given who he is.
Yes.
I think Allen Robinson needs the touchdowns. Needs multiple touchdowns, whereas Ty could do it, just with a couple long catches.
So do you think that there are spots where you'd prefer like Paris Campbell plus higher priced flex player? Like, I guess we haven't found a defense that we really like. Has there been a defense that you think we've passed up that you actually like?
I think the two I mentioned are expensive,
49ers.
and now what we're going to do here were the Niners and the Titans.
It's not looking great down there. You don't want to play the Chargers against Kansas City. You don't really want to play the Jets against San Francisco. Jimmy G is not really that turnover prone, right? Miami against Buffalo. We haven't discussed that one yet. Detroit, Green Bay, probably not the best spot. Houston against Baltimore, probably not going to play that. Carolina at Tampa Bay, maybe if Tom Brady is completely horrible, which, I mean, who knows. I guess the Panthers, probably not the way to go. They're pretty bad defensively overall. Jacksonville, that doesn't really go in line with what our team is doing. The Giants, Mitch Trubisky's bad. That's kind of where I think we're going to get stuck, is trying to figure out which defense we like.
I'm fine. I'm like, there are teams there that like they're not. I don't think they're my in a vacuum my favorite defensive play, but there were teams on that list in like the 2,500 range that I'd be totally fine playing. So I think maybe the way to do it is
we could
find a flex guy.
Find a flex guy instead.
And see what we have left.
Yeah. Well, or we could just not put in. We could just not put in. I just won't lock in that last spot. But like, what about something like the Colts D?
Yeah, that's what I was like. It's like either bringing it back with Taylor, or if you want to get a little bit cute, like doing like a Naheem Hines and bring it back with the Colts D. Does Hines still return kicks for them?
I don't know. I think with Marlon Mack on, they would probably try to limit that. But also, we could theoretically do something like Paris Campbell instead of T.Y. Hilton. We have 4,400 left, but let's not focus on this yet. We'll get back to this this part of things. Next up is Buffalo against Miami. So Buffalo minus 235, Miami plus 200. The over/under is 41. The spread's 5.5. The Dolphins had trouble scoring against the Patriots. I'll do the Miami side. The Dolphins had trouble scoring against the Patriots. They had 11 points. Fitz was not magical. Gaskin had the most work in the backfield, which was, I think, shocking to most people. everybody, I think, assumed it would be a 50-50 split with Breda and Jordan Howard. Devontae Parker didn't have a good week last week, went out with injury. So maybe, yeah, I mean, basically just went out with injury. Preston Williams, 7 targets, only 2 catches. Mike Gesicki, 5 targets. I don't think I love any of the plays from Miami to supplant the guys that we have. Like, I guess, yeah, I don't think I really want to play a wide receiver against Buffalo. We don't have a clear enough idea of the backfield to play them against Buffalo, or even to play them against anybody, really, because we don't know who's going to get the ball. And then Gesicki at 4,000. We like Herndon. And there were some other players like right around that number that probably don't want to go to Gesicki either. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. If you told me I had to play a Dolphin, it'd probably be Gesicki. But backfield's a mess, and I think this Buffalo secondary is a stay away spot if you're not dealing with a talented offense. So I don't see myself having many Dolphins at all. I don't even know how many of these guys will end up in my player pool, to be honest.
Yep.
Maybe Parker or Williams, but I doubt I'll have anything more than 1 or 2 lineups, if that.
Yeah.
On the Buffalo side, I think you could bring it back here. They had a big game for this Buffalo offense, and Josh Allen in particular in week 1. He's expensive, but talked a little bit last week about the fact that he is basically their goal line running back. Even though they brought in Zach Moss, Josh Allen still had a ton of work down in the red zone as a rusher, which you love to see. He threw a pass down there. Was still a little turnover prone, but I don't really care about that from a fantasy perspective. I like this Miami defense or Miami team. I think that I like Brian Flores. And I don't know much about him, but in a little bit I've seen. So I buy into the narrative that this Miami team will take a step this year.
Yeah.
But I also think this Buffalo team is really good. I think they're hungry, and that all these teams sort of see a path to a AFC East title for the first time in a long time without Brady in New England, which sort of improves focus, or could improve focus. So, and on the Miami side, where I was going with that is that they were really, really bad last year. Obviously, better down the stretch, but still were exploitable in the passing game. So, Allen Diggs, Allen John Brown, Miami wasn't great against the tight end. You could throw a little Dawson Knox in there, but
A little
that's
stinky.
thin. Running backs, I don't know if I want to really, I think it's a coin toss for what they're going to do at this point. If I was going to play one, it'd probably be Singletary. He still had the passing game work, but I like the Allen and the wide receivers here. If you're going to go with Buffalo, and I wouldn't mind doing it.
Yeah, so I mean, Josh Allen pretty similar to Cam in how they accrue fantasy points. So the fact that Cam did it last week, probably feel good about Josh Allen doing something similar. This was the other player that Mr. Patrick sent me something on, was Josh Allen. So he sent me some stats about it, but I'm just going to say what he wrote. Josh Allen's passing was roughly league average outside of the red zone. However, he was an inefficient passer in the red zone, thus inflating the number of red zone passes he threw from 10 to 13. Even so, his volume was significantly above average, and his red zone volume was massive on both an absolute and relative basis. So another thing pointing towards Josh Allen being a good play in a vacuum, and then even more so against the Dolphins in a game they're supposed to win, and against the team that we just saw Cam Newton do the same thing. So, yeah, I think Josh Allen is a good play. What do you think about Josh Allen against Aaron Rodgers?
I'd probably bet on. I'd take Allen to outscore Rodgers, but Rodgers and Adams to outscore Allen and Diggs. But I think they're both good plays. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if either of those pairings ended up as the top scoring stack.
All right, cool. I think that's enough for that game. Was there any last thing you wanted to say about that?
No, I mean I think it just goes further point. red zone usage is gold for fantasy football, and Josh Allen gets more than almost anybody in the league.
Yep. All right. Washington, Arizona. Washington plus 260. Arizona minus 305. The over/under is 46.5, and the spread is 7. The Washington football team is coming off a win over the Eagles. Dwayne Haskins only had 12.8 points in that game. Peyton Barber scored 2 touchdowns, which was absolutely hilarious. Antonio Gibson, everybody was on. Gibson will probably have a lot less ownership this week. Had 9 attempts and 2 targets. I think everybody expected a lot more in the form of targets. In the passing game, I think Terry McLaurin and Steven Sims are going to be in play almost every single week because they're the main targets. A lot of people were discussing Logan Thomas coming into the season. I've heard some people say Logan Thomas is like going to be this year's Darren Waller, but I don't think that Logan Thomas is athletic enough to be Darren Waller, because like Darren Waller got 150 targets, 100 receptions, like 1,000 yards, was on the bad side of touchdown variance. I just think it's not a great comparison in terms of like actual ability. Maybe it makes sense from like how many fantasy points Logan Thomas can score if he has like a really good touchdown season, but I'm not buying that yet. I did not watch much of the Cardinals against the 49ers. But I feel like what's your take on Gibson? Are you going to have Gibson in your player pool most weeks just hoping that he has a pop-off game at like a low number, or are you going to stay away until you see consistency?
I'll take it week by week, but I will still have him in there this week. What I'm looking at basically has him around what he did last week, 10 carries, 9.5 carries, and 3 targets. And at that, sort of just enough to put him at a point where I'm comfortable playing him. It's sort of right around where I'd cut things off. If we continue to see Barber get the goal line work and the passing game volume to be thin, I think at that point you might want to rethink things. But week 4 is usually my point where I'm willing to dismiss all of my preseason assumptions and say, look, this is what they're doing. Week 1, 2, 3, I'm kind of like matchups, and you just never know what'll come next. So yeah, I guess I could end up. I think you're right that I could end up regretting this horribly, like very quickly into the games. But I want to have a bunch of Logan Thomas this week. They got him targets last week. He appears to be the tight end for them. And the Cardinals have just been crushed by tight ends for a couple of years in a row now. Last week at the beginning of the season, it was almost comical, the way they were just getting torched for like 100 yards and 2 touchdowns every week.
Flowchart.
And flowchart. Cardinals tight ends against Cardinals. Last week the numbers don't jump out at you, but if you combine Kittle, who's banged up for a lot of the game and almost doesn't like fit here because he's the focal point of that passing attack. Mm-hmm. But if you put Kittle, whoever their second tight end is in San Francisco, Jordan Reed and Kyle Juszczyk's passing stats together from Sunday. Most teams don't have a fullback. It was basically like 12 targets, 10 catches, 89 yards. So I don't think there's any signal there that we need to change that assumption. And to the Waller point, I think to me, it's sort of the athletic profile. Waller at the combine came in at 6'6", 235, ran a 4.45 40, 37-inch vertical, was at 10.5 on the broad jump, which is insane. Logan Thomas was 6'6", 240 something, 4'6", 140, 36-inch vertical, 9'10 in the broad jump. Mm-hmm. So Waller was, a even freakier athlete, but I think that's probably where the comparisons come in is just the, athletic profile. I was hoping to have a little more time to like evaluate that. I mentioned Logan Thomas is just I like his story. Came out of Virginia Tech as a quarterback and is like 5 years into this project of turning him into a tight end
Revenge
at the
game
NFL
narrative
level.
against the Cardinals. I didn't even think about that.
I did not either. So that might put the be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Um, but he's pretty cheap. 3,600 will be a pivot off. I mean, Herndon's only projected at 7% ownership. But he's another play down there, value tight end that I like this week. On the rest of the Washington side, I think McLaurin you can always play. He'll get Patrick Peterson this week, but Peterson hasn't been a matchup that you really need to avoid in the past couple of years. So I'm not really that afraid of him. Sims I'm fine with, but I don't know. I don't want to touch his backfield, other than maybe a share or two of Gibson. On the Arizona side, I think you can fire up Kyler Murray. He's a little bit, might be the last week you can get him at something in this price range. He was my third highest owned quarterback in my first crunch.
6,100 is crazy. That seems really low.
Yeah, I mean less than Stafford. Like he said, Wentz, Cousins, Tannehill. I think he's by far, if I'm looking at it, yeah, he's my number 1 point per dollar quarterback. I think and on the sort of Hopkins would be the obvious guy to pair him up with. I don't think you never go wrong there, but maybe the leverage play would be Kirk, who got 5 targets last week. Didn't really do anything in the box score, but
oh yeah,
you got to figure that the eyeballs will be on Nook this week, and Fitz and Kirk might have a chance to do something. I don't mind Kenyon Drake either. Redskins. I think this defense looks good against the Eagles. I think they're definitely an improved defense from last year. But the Eagles were running out of second string offensive line last week. This Cardinals offense is a whole other bag of worms. So I don't think that the Redskins will be a defense that we necessarily target every week, but I don't think they're scary enough for me to really put pause on the Cardinals offense because of them.
Okay, so Logan Thomas against Herndon.
I think I'm going Logan Thomas. I think there's more touchdown equity there. Like I could see the Jets just doing nothing. I'd
Sure,
rather not
yeah,
have
I
a
can see
Jet
that.
in my perfect lineup. Probably more risk there. I think if it was a cash game lineup, I'd take Herndon. I think there's more security in him getting 3 catches. But
Yeah.
If we're trying to win a GPP, I think I like Thomas.
Okay, and then so do you like Drew Lock plus Cortland Sutton with Juju Smith-Schuster, or would you rather have Kyler Murray either naked or with one of the wide receivers? Like I could see Kyler on his own being a really good play, only 700 more than Drew Lock. Kirk's only 4,300. That seems kind of insane to me. So both of those players seem completely mispriced.
Yeah, I think that's the better value. The ownership might give you more, might be a reason to move to Lock and the Broncos guys. But if you're asking me who's going to score more points, I think it's these Cardinals.
So what do you prefer? We can go about it either way. Like if we're gonna have Logan Thomas for it to be a tournament lineup, and Kyler's only 700 more than Drew Lock. I mean, how often does Kyler Murray outscore Drew Lock? It's got to be like a crazy high percentage of the time, especially with the rushing equity. If Washington does manage to get into the backfield, were most of Kyler's rushing yards came off of scrambles last week, right? He had 100 yards rushing, and it was basically all scrambling.
I didn't look at last week, but last year they didn't do a lot of design runs with him. It was when he ran, it was scrambles. So that would be my expectation. I'm looking at it now.
All right, so I'm getting rid of Juju and Jerry Jeudy. Are you comfortable putting Kirk in there? Was there anything that you saw last week that wants you to stay away from wide receivers against Washington? No, right?
No, they've still got Josh Norman, but they were I think. Last year, Washington was below league average in terms of wide receiver defense. Not significantly so, but there's nothing that scares me as a matchup.
Did
I guess the pass rush would be. I'm more concerned about the Washington pass rush getting home and disrupting the timing of this offense than I am about the Washington secondary shutting down these receivers.
I think Josh Norman was released, right?
Was he?
I-
They talked about him during the game on Sunday, so
Oh.
I assumed he was still there. But
I'm not sure. Let's see. This is probably important. Josh Norman.
I don't think. I mean, at this point, I don't think there's much difference between Josh Norman and any other pro
Sure, I get
cornerback.
that, yeah.
But that was the reason I brought him up. They mentioned somebody filling in for him.
Yeah, he's on the Bills now. But either way, it doesn't
Okay.
really matter. So so we're taking out Juju. We're taking out Cortland Sutton. We're putting in Christian Kirk with Kyler Murray, running it back with Logan Thomas. So we have 2 wide receiver spots to still fill in. Were there any wide receiver plays that you loved from earlier you would want to get back in? Like we could do Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Mike Evans, Allen Robinson.
If there's room for Adams, I think my lineup building, like part of it this week will basically be like if I can get to Devontae Adams as my wide receiver 1, I'm gonna get to Devontae Adams as my wide receiver 1.
So would you rather, like, if you'd have to pivot off, you'd probably have to pivot off of Devontae Adams, Derrick Henry, or Zeke to get a little bit extra money because right now it's at $3,050 for the 2 remaining slots. So you could probably do like one of those defenses you were talking about and then a second tight end that's really inexpensive, or you could try to chase some of the value from one of the earlier games. We could leave it like this though for now until we figure out who the last player we like is. So next up, we have Kansas City and Los Angeles. KC is minus 375 on the road. Los Angeles is plus 310. Over/under is 47.5. The spread's 8.5. I don't really like any of the plays there in terms of betting. It's going to be pretty tough to think of scenarios where the Chargers like win this outright. I'll take the Chiefs. So Mahomes didn't have a great first game. I don't think that I prefer Mahomes against Kyler either way. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I'm probably going to be fading him a lot of the season, which is might be a mistake. You get a little bit of a price discount off of Zeke and Derrick Henry. So if we're thinking to ourselves, we need to get off one of these running backs for a little bit more value, that could bring us into a spot where we have a better flex play. Tyreek, again, not really a player I play often. If I ran 150, I think I'd have more exposure to Tyreek on a weekly basis. Sammy Watkins had a good week 1. I like Sammy Watkins as a player in general. I think he's underrated at this point, which is kind of insane for somebody who is a first-round pick, like a top 5 pick. I'm not playing Hardman or Robinson. Kelsey, 7,000. I'm not playing Kelsey at 7,000. But it's the Chiefs. Like you're going to want to have exposure to these players week in, week out. Matchup doesn't matter for the most part. So I'm not going to tell you anything you're not going to hear from every other place about the Chiefs, outside of my willingness to fade them and get burned. So do you have anything for the Chiefs? Like, are you higher on Mahomes this week or Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Like, do you think that is a good way to get off of Zeke and Derrick Henry, or no?
Yeah, I like. So you can Andy Reid running backs just historically dominate for fantasy purposes. So it's just a great role. I think the piece of it we didn't see as much from Edwards-Helaire in week 1 that the great Andy Reid running backs of the past, like Brian Westbrook and Shady McCoy and guys like that is the passing game work. So I think that would maybe be the reason to fade him if you want to sort of talk yourself into that, not just this week, but just sort of that him as a continuing to do what other people have done in that role. But certainly from a ownership perspective this week, right around the same price point, I think you can pivot and differentiate yourself if and as you said, the Chiefs are always a threat to put up a ton of points, but they're expensive for that reason. I don't love them this week. As I mentioned last week, I think that this Chargers defensive front is really good. If they can get pressure with the front 4, maybe that's a way to slow the Chiefs down a little bit. But I think, it's a neutral to maybe slightly down matchup for the Chiefs. So I'll want some of them because for the reasons you just said, they're always a threat to go off, but not looking to fill up my lineup with them. I do the way I would want to do it, and when I do it might be the way I get more exposure to guys like Hill and Kelsey. Will be maybe some Charger stacks and just hope for some garbage time points. Tyrod Taylor is a guy I mentioned last week I like as a player. I always like quarterbacks who have the ability to get you some points in the running game. 35, 40 yards is just as good as another passing touchdown when it comes to fantasy points. And you can pick that up on, a couple of cheap scrambles late in the game when teams are in prevent or something. So I don't mind, like Tyrod, Austin Eckler, and Hunter Henry, and bring it back with Tyreek Hill, who, in addition to the nice thing about Hill, even if you think the Chiefs kill it here, is he can still sort of come out and maybe return a punt return, even if he's, on the bench from a offensive perspective or they're running the ball more. Low probability event, but again, it's just another way you can get there and get an extra 6 points or something. So I want to be overweight on the field on the Chargers, not going to go crazy there. We'll want to be at the fields, probably with the Chiefs, if not above, just because I think that's always the place you want to be with that offense. But no one here that I'm particularly targeting. If you want to get crazy, no one's going to own the Chargers defense, and they're cheap. So if you have like a super chalky lineup otherwise, and all they need to do is house a punt return or house a kick return or something. They don't even need to play good defense, and they can pay off at 2,300 or whatever they're at.
What do you think about Keenan Allen at 5,700?
I doubt I'll end up there, just particularly given some of the options around that price point. I like them better. Ty is the same price. Marvin Jones is the same price. Gallup is 100 less. Sterling Shepard, who you mentioned, is 200 less. So a lot of options I like in that range. And I forget how many targets he had last week, projected at...
He had 8.
6.5. He had 8 last week, projected at 6.5. And what I'm looking at right now, last season that number is 10, 11 almost every week. I feel like the price... This might be a fair price for him, but I don't think he's underpriced, even if it's less than he used to be. So I'll want to probably take a little bit more time to get there. I have 5% of him in this first crunch I did. So I will own some Keenan Allen, but he's not my preferred play at that level.
Okay, and then Mike Williams is 4,200. I'm just thinking, because of how the Texans didn't play well offensively. Will Fuller had 100 yards. It seems like that kind of spot. They seem like they're going to be pretty forced. So if you're playing Tyrod, are you going to play Tyrod alone, or would you play Keenan or Mike Williams?
Yeah, so I think going back to some of this roster construction stuff, quarterback without any position from without a skill position stacked with him is only 7% of winning lineups. If you and 3.5 of that is the running back quarterback stack that we said doesn't happen that much. So running stacks naked is viable, but it's not something that I do. So if I don't have someone I like for the stack, but it rarely happens, right? I think you'd always find a guy to put in there. But so I like if Eckler or Hunter Henry. I think it'll be guys that'll just be featured in this offense all season. So I don't mind a quarterback wide receiver or quarterback running back tight end stack there.
Okay.
Of the two receivers, I think I'd rather go with Williams. I think his skill set, just you only need to chuck up a couple and he goes up and gets it and can pay off. With Keenan Allen, you need that volume. And so between the price and the way that I think that this offense will play with Tyrod at the helm, I like Williams.
So what do you think Tyrod against Drew Lock?
I'd probably take Lock. I'd rather play Tyrod in cash games. I think there's a better. I have a hard time seeing a scenario where Tyrod doesn't get you 12, 15 fantasy points, which will get you to 3x at a cheap price. Like Locke, I could see the Steelers defense coming and blowing off the doors, killing
Yeah.
that Denver offensive line, and Locke just
8 or
looking
9.
helpless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, fair enough. All right, last game, Baltimore at Houston. I will talk about the Houston Texans. So we have
Talk about Lamar.
Baltimore minus 315, Houston plus 270. The over under is 50. The spread is 7 points. Deshaun is 6,400. Great price for Deshaun. The fact that Kyler is lower means that most people would probably just go to Kyler. I think Deshaun's a great play. I think a lot of people will end up getting there. I'm not sure. The ownership for Deshaun is currently 3%. That can't be right. He will not end up.
That's what I have too. And that's to your point is Kyler at 12, so about a quarter of the expected ownership.
That okay. I mean, then Deshaun's a great tournament play.
Agreed.
David Johnson looked good. Duke Johnson might miss this game. Still listed as questionable as of today. David Johnson, I think, is a good player overall. Does get a lot of the receiving work still. When the Browns played against the Ravens, Kareem Hunt was able to carve out a larger role because of the pass game. So there should be passing game work available to David Johnson, especially if he's getting the entire share of like the backfield. Will Fuller was horrible in the first game and still had 100 yards. Is going to be the primary target, I think. Well, most people think for the entire season. At 6,300, it's a little bit more difficult to fit him into your lineup, but you're still in a range with a lot of other popular plays probably. So right now, Will Fuller's at 6.6%. I don't really know what kind of game he'd have to completely destroy everybody who doesn't have him. Like you'd probably have to get into the 40 range, which is doable. Like Will Fuller's the kind of player that can get that. I know that you respect the Ravens secondary, so maybe it's a lot less likely to happen against the Ravens. But getting to 3 to 5x30, I mean, I could see it. I think Will Fuller's a really good tournament play, especially at 6.6% owned. Brandon Cooks is listed as questionable still. Needs some clarity there. I'm not playing Randall Cobbs or Kenny Stills. And then we have Akins and Fells. I'm not playing either of them over Herndon or Thomas. So that's basically it for the Texans.
Yeah, I do. I think this Baltimore secondary is very good, but I think you're getting enough of an ownership discount on Watson, given his upside, particularly on the ground.
Yeah.
He's a guy that similar to Josh Allen and some of these guys we've talked about. Tyrod can definitely do it on the ground and pick you up some points that way. Fuller is, in that Tyreek Evans, Deshaun Jackson class where, even in a bad matchup, he just needs to get behind you and you can't catch him. And that's a good place to be if he's on your fantasy team. So I don't want to have a ton of these guys just because I think that it's sort of low probability, high payoff type thing, which I think is how you described it.
Yeah.
Will Fuller at 2% is, as we said earlier, right? The types of sub 5% ownership plays that typically win you a GPP are not the fifth string guy off the bench coming out of nowhere. It's a guy like Will Fuller in a bad matchup, figuring out how to get it done and putting up a huge game at 2% ownership. So absolutely like that. And I think this Houston defense didn't look great when we saw them to open the season.
Mm-hmm.
This Baltimore offense looked spectacular. Lamar was dropping dimes all over the place. The running threat didn't even really need to come out. Marquise Brown had a big game. Mark Andrews had a big game. J.K. Dobbins got in the end zone twice. I think he's a trap this week. He only had like 6 or 7 touches last week. He did get that goal line work. I'm not going to Mark Ingram. I don't think either of the Ravens running backs will be in my player pool. They don't get the passing game work, and given the split of carries, I just don't trust either one of them. But Lamar is 8,200. Despite that, he is one of my higher point per dollar quarterbacks. Wow. I think paying up at quarterback in GPPs is in general suboptimal. So I always end up having to sort of squeeze my ownership on these top QBs because they're always grading out really well in the projections. So in my first run, I ended up with 25% Lamar. I will not be that high, but I do like going both ways on this game and having Lamar, Andrews, Marquise with Will Fuller bringing it back, having a couple Deshaun Watson stacks with one of these Ravens receivers bringing it back. Could see the Ravens crushing here. I'm a Lamar stan. I think this Ravens team, despite the playoff struggles the last couple of years, is just gonna I think they'll be the number one seed coming out of the AFC. Certainly not a hot take, but so I could see them really beating up the Texans here. In which case, maybe this game isn't what we want it to be from a fantasy perspective, but I don't mind being over the field on both these teams.
Yeah, I'm trying. Did the Ravens play against the Texans last year? No, they didn't. I don't know. I kind of like Houston. Like I'm not saying that Houston is the favorite to win the game, but I don't think that it's 70-30 or 75-25. I don't think it's in that range. I like Houston more than that. So I think
Yeah, I like the Ravens. I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking for like a real life bet perspective. Like, is it worth putting a bet in at 270? Like, because I think most of the time when they cover that spread, they also have really good chances to win the game. So like, I think that's actually probably a pretty good bet. I think a lot of people won't be able to convince themselves to get there. So if you want to wait for the number, you could probably get a better number. If you wanted to just bet Houston at 270, you could probably get a better number than 270 once the early games happen. But yeah, I think it was a great point about Will Fuller. So we've already mentioned a few players like that: Will Fuller, DJ Moore. So I guess those are some guys to take a look at in player pools for this weekend. But basically, we are finished. The almost perfect lineup right now is Kyler Murray, Zeke, Derrick Henry, Christian Kirk, Devontae Adams, T.Y. Hilton, Logan Thomas. So we have a flex and a D spot for 3,000. So, I mean, we don't necessarily need to finish the lineup, but let's talk about what expensive play we would get off of to create some more space. Because, like, I don't think I'd want to play a flex, a tight end in the flex, which is kind of the spot where we'd be stuck right now. So if you had to move off of Zeke, Derrick Henry, or Devontae Adams, which one of those do you think is the best to pivot off of for like a tournament?
I think I'd probably pivot off of Henry, mainly from an ownership perspective. And as mentioned a couple times now, the passing game work is rarely there. Going back, seems like every season they're like, hey, we're going to get him more involved in the passing game. Hey, we're going to get him more involved in the passing game. And then it just never happens.
Yeah.
He has 0 games. I was just looking at his game log going back to 2017 with more than 3 targets, which is what he had last week. So if he gets to 4, maybe I'll start to change my priors. But yeah, I think that alone is what sort of pushes me towards those other 2 guys. Although with that being said, like, where'd it go? I think you could go like Adam Humphries at 34, and a defense in the mid-20s isn't bad. If you can get a super cheap defense, I guess we're not quite there, but if you come off of Henry to a slightly, just like even just a Dalvin Cook and get yourself that $400. Corey Davis is only 4,000. You slide Corey Davis into that flex spot, and you have again 2,500 or so to play with for that defensive position. Mm-hmm. I like both of those as a build. If you get Henry out of there, I guess I would want to play Humphries and Henry in the same lineup without Tannehill, but there's that. And then the other guy, Mike Williams at 42. I think if you come off of Henry to one of those next running backs down, Edwards-Helaire would be another option maybe there. Mike Williams at 42. Brashad Perryman's down at somewhere around there. I don't really love him. But Deontay Johnson, we didn't really talk about him, but he's my number one point per dollar wide receiver play based on projections. Ended up with a ton of him in my first builds. The same was true last week, and he basically paid off, even though he didn't really play that great. But he might be a guy if you go a little bit further down at running back at 45. I think he'd be a good option.
All right, so then what about Kyler, Zeke, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Kirk, Devontae Adams, T.Y. Hilton, Logan Thomas, Deontay Johnson? The thing that I was kind of looking at was I would probably want to, like, if one of your I guess you did say that Devontae Adams was really the guy that you're trying to get into all your lineups, but if you went off of Devontae Adams instead and went down to Allen Robinson or Mike Evans, DJ Moore, Will Fuller, like that range, you could kind of rotate through that, and then you might actually be able to get two of those guys into your lineup by getting off of Devonta Adams, and because then you have, let's just plug in a random defense like Tampa Bay. Let's say Tampa Bay controls Christian McCaffrey. I don't think I like Tampa Bay that much because, like, are you going to be able to force Teddy Bridgewater to actually open up and get those turnovers? But anything right around the 3,000 mark, you could still get up to the 6,300 range. So you could take a chalk defense like the Titans. Yeah. So the Titans plus Derrick Henry. Then you have 6,200 left, and you can get Marquise Brown. So, I mean, that's basically it.
Yeah. All right, and even I think if you want to go that avenue, swap out Adams instead of Henry, you could just go down to like Julio Jones or Tyreek Hill even, and just save that 600 or 700 and sort of do the same thing with the Deontay Johnson or one of those sort of low 4,000s type wide receivers.
All right, cool. Well, thanks everybody for watching. If you like this content, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share, whatever you got to do. Billy, thanks for stopping by once again. And otherwise, that was our breakdown for NFL Week 2 and the almost perfect lineup. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later.